Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of The Journeymen, a podcast dedicated to the work of overlooked and underrated filmmakers. On each episode, we pick a director who we feel more or less fits that description and work our way chronologically through their entire filmography. My name is Michael Pattison. I'm here with my co-host,
Bobby Lowe.
Follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen and subscribe to us through SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, or YouTube. This episode is the third and final part in our focus on Tony Scott, and we'll cover his last 6 features. They are Spy Game from 2001, Man on Fire 2004, Domino 2005, Deja Vu 2006, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 2009, and Unstoppable 2010. Along the way, we'll also be covering very, very briefly 2 of his short films. They are Beat the Devil, 2002, and Agent Orange, 2004. At the end of the last episode, we finished with Enemy of the State, his 1998 film. And so there's a 3-year gap between that movie and going into production with his next one. Bobby, I'm sure you have all of the research and details regarding what Tony Scott was up to in those 3 years.
Of course I do.
Before you delve into such history, I should just ask or warn you that if in the event it sounds like I'm in a war zone here at my end, it is at the time of recording in the midst of firework celebrations in the surrounding neighborhood. And those are fireworks that you can hear as a result, not gunshots.
Well, some of them could be gunshots.
Some of them could be gunshots disguised as fireworks, some opportunistic firearm discharge.
Okay, so this is all per Variety's archives, as usual. In November of 1998, after Enemy of the State, Scott was in negotiations to direct a film called Josiah's Cannon for Fox 2000, which was described as an action thriller about a Holocaust survivor who leads the world's foremost team of bank robbers on a heist of a Swiss bank that houses riches deposited by Weimar Jews who were subsequently murdered in concentration camps. And at one point it was up in the air as to whether Ridley or Tony would direct that. Around the same time, he was also attached to direct The Tailor of Panama, which ended up being directed by John Boorman. And he was also attached to a feature adaptation of Elmore Leonard's Kill Shot for Miramax, which was potentially going to star Robert De Niro and Quentin Tarantino.
Wow.
In January of 1999, he was attached to direct Gemini Man for Disney, which has now been directed by Ang Lee, nearly, 20 years later. Which is coming out next year with Will Smith. In June of 1999, he was attached to direct a film called Takedown for Jerry Bruckheimer Films, which would have centered on a U.S. Marshal on the trail of an assassin who has raped and killed his friend. But the following year, in May 2000, when he actually committed to direct that, the story, the logline had changed. It said it was about a team of U.S. Marshals pursuing a killer who is being protected by another government agency. Based on the non-fiction book Deadly Force in the Streets with the U.S. Marshal Service by Karsten Stroud. Not incompatible loglines, but the emphasis is different. Later that year, he was also developing a smuggling thriller called Lucky Strike, also with Jerry Bruckheimer. The following year, he was also going to direct Taking Lives, which was originally going to star Cate Blanchett, but after it was put into turnaround, it was then more likely going to star Gwyneth Paltrow, based largely on the novel of the same name by British political and cultural newspaper columnist Michael Pye. The Taking Lives script follows a female FBI profiler on the trail of a sociopath. After murdering various strangers, the wandering killer actually assumes the identities of those he's slain, and that movie was ultimately directed by DJ Caruso in 2004. Around the same time, he was approached to direct a film called Hopeless to Hardcore for Universal Pictures and Castle Rock Entertainment, which would have explored the aftermath of Colonel David Hackworth's 1971 decision to oppose the Vietnam War while still serving as a Special Forces commander. Later that year, so we're up to September 2000 now, he was going to direct a film called Hell's Angel, which I think is a film that he stayed attached to for quite a long time for Fox 2000. which would have been the authorized film history of the fabled counterculture motorcycle club Hells Angels. That would have been based on a recently published memoir of club leader Ralph Sonny Barger. Variety said that it's significant in that it's the first film with the blessing of the Angels and the permission to use the club's logo, and that distinguishes it from a slew of biker films over the years with generic gangs all modelled after the Angels. Barger is the true-life version of the bare-chested, tattooed, quick-fisted, womanizing, leather-jacketed toughs seen ruling the road in countless B-movies. His Angels adventures date back to 1957 when he formed the Oakland chapter of the Angels and helped spread it across the West Coast and across the globe. The film would have included all the violence, sex and carefree living that marked the heyday of the bike club, and reportedly wouldn't have shied away from the numerous legal beefs that sent Barger to prison, or the infamous 1969 Rolling Stones concert at Altamount where the Angels were hired to work security and the concert was one giant drunken melee. So, as I said, I think he stayed attached to that for a while. Okay, and then the next film that he actually got off the ground was 2001's Spy Game.
We're in the process of dealing with a fairly specific international flap. We brought you in here as a stopgap. Fill in a few holes for us.
Something like the little Dutch boy, huh?
Yeah, we just need you to be a team player on this one, Muir. Why is that funny?
Every time my coach told me that, I knew I was about to get benched.
A week ago, Tom Bishop disappeared in Hong Kong. Last night he turned up outside Shanghai. He's been arrested for espionage. We're working up a complete profile based on relevant personal histories and op records. This has to be handled with kid gloves.
How long does the president have to claim it?
24 hours.
Starting when?
As of now, Bishop has been classified as a common criminal and will be executed at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, our time.
What about the press? Why not leak it and throw the spotlight on China and buy us some time?
We need the press on this like we need a third tit.
You using the other two?
We don't want outside influences to limit our options.
What was Bishop doing in China?
He was with an operation for Harry Duncan.
Was?
Yes, until he took matters into his own hands.
Okay, so Spy Game, written by Michael Frost Beckner and David Arata from a story by Beckner, produced by Douglas Wick and Mark Abraham for Beacon Pictures and distributed by Universal Pictures and Beacon Pictures, released in the US and the UK in November of 2001 and in Ireland in January of 2002. The film had an estimated production budget of $115 million and was a flop. It grossed $62 million domestically and $80 million internationally for a total of $143 million. The premise here, per Google, Robert Redford stars as CIA operative Nathan Muir, who is on the brink of retirement from the field, when he learns his protege, Tom Bishop, played by Brad Pitt, has been arrested in China on a charge of espionage. No stranger to the machinations of the CIA's top echelon, Muir hones all his skills in a reverent manner in order to find a way to free Bishop. So this was one of 3 films that we're going to cover on this episode that I hadn't seen before, but I had seen part of it because in 2002, my brother and I rented it and bailed on it halfway through because we found it so boring.
Oh, man. I saw it at the cinema upon its first release with my dad, which must have been like, what, a couple of months after 9/11?
Yeah, it was November 2001.
So, like, you know, we've Tony Scott's actually made of several films that are like set either towards the end of the Cold War or like sort of like just after it, or like in this sort of post-Cold. So you got like Top Gun towards the end of the Cold War. You got Crimson Tide post-Cold War. Yeah. Then on the end of the last episode, or episode 9, Enemy of the State.
Yeah.
Which is like post-Cold War, but made obviously released like, you know, pre 9/11 as well.
Right, yeah, we spoke about that. We spoke about that in terms of the visual style and the emphasis on like surveillance and information technology being very kind of millennial, you know.
And then this is like set in 1991, but then made obviously 10 years after that, and it makes a point of being, you know, quote unquote global, like Shanghai, Washington DC, Langley CIA headquarters, London, Hong Kong, etc., etc. I subsequently bought it on VHS as well after watching it at the cinema with my dad. And I remember being taken in by and very much intrigued, but also very surprised by its emphases upon like Le Carre-esque interwar politics, like within an agency, rather than like the more sort of sexed up exotic qualities of global espionage. Although it obviously has that too, and there's two films sort of competing here, and I love one, and I don't really like the other one so much.
Which one do you like?
So, from the premise that you've just given, we see in the opening sequence Bishop is imprisoned because during like a botched exfiltration job, as we come to realize it is, and so he spends the entire film in the sort of present day 24-hour setting. The clip that we've just heard, it's established that you've got 24 hours in which to rescue this guy or not rescue him, as the agency is likely to decide. But then you've got to obviously, so Muir's brought in by sort of his superiors who want the lowdown on Bishop as a character, as a guy, and so Muir is telling him how he recruited Bishop. So it's pitched kind of in a way as an old-fashioned spy recruitment film, rooted via increasingly extensive flashbacks to like the Cold War era, Berlin, Beirut, Cyprus, and the present day segments have that sort of post-Cold War feel. So, because the entire like 24-hour time frame, if you like, within the film, the present day section, if you like, the 1981 section, it's set against the backdrop of a pending China-US trade negotiations.
You said that. You said that Redford's character Muir spends the entire film in the present day segment, but I mean he's in the flashbacks as much as.
No. Did I say that? I didn't mean to.
Sorry, maybe I misheard you.
Yeah, I much prefer Robert Redford going about his business in the headquarters of the CIA, and the flashbacks that exposit his, the recruitment of Bishop into the CIA, I don't find particularly of interest, even though on paper I sort of should.
Right. Yeah.
So what I like about it when I say the Le Carre-esque emphases is, on the one hand, on paper at least, the human scale by which spies are recruited, and the fragile, precarious relationships that espionage with global ramifications rests upon.
Right. Yeah, I agree. The aspect of this film that I liked was Redford in the 24-hour period, kind of using his knowledge of the various procedures that the CIA are going to follow in this kind of situation in order to evade detection while he kind of like maneuvers behind their back. That was all really interesting and effective, I think. But yeah, I agree that you essentially get like a lot of different, flashbacks to different missions. And they're of varying lengths. Like we have a Vietnam segment. We have like a training montage thing where he's being trained in spycraft.
Yeah.
And then we have a very, very, very long Beirut segment that was so long that at a certain point I realized that I had kind of forgotten all about the China story.
So that's the thing, right? So it actually reminds me the structure of this film of something that Christopher Nolan would attempt, and I think succeed at much more successfully. So you've got like, as you said, the spycraft sequences, rooftop meetings, a narrative rhythm where which have a lightness and touch, the flashbacks. It sort of offsets or threatens to offset at least the seriousness of the present day office bound conversations, interrogations, if you like. So like the flashbacks give the backstory in this witty way, but also in such a way, I think, that I totally agree. You can forget the gravity of Bishop's ongoing situation in the Chinese jail cell,
Yeah.
and of also Muir's own situation in trying to affect it. So I think there's an imbalance that I think is down, but also quite Nolan-esque in a way. But it's down to the fact that the present-day emergency unfolds over 24 hours, and the flashbacks span a potted history of like a decade. I think the meeting 75,
Yeah.
and the last time he's seen Bishop in the story is in 85, something like that. So
85, yeah, it's mid-70s to mid-80s, whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, you said a lightness of touch in the flashbacks. I thought that Muir's I thought that Redford's performance as Muir was very different, whether it's in the present day or in the flashbacks, because in the flashbacks I thought he came across as callous and cold, and there's even a scene where he lets somebody die deliberately. He lets somebody die, and Tom Bishop has like a moral objection to it, and they have this rooftop meeting that you mentioned, and Tom tells him, like, I'm not ending up like you, and it's this kind of, you're what happens when you kind of abandon your morality to, he says, don't give me any shit about the greater good, and he says, well, it is for the greater good. Whereas in the like, we're never really given any way of understanding why Muir would be like that in the mid-80s, but in 1991 he would go behind the back of the CIA and go, essentially contrary to the greater good, if what the CIA is doing is the greater good or whatever. It just seemed like there was a little bit missing there, like the character seems to have changed. And
perhaps what I meant by the way by lightness and touch, I just mean maybe the way it's sort of structured. So like this potted history that, and particularly it's the training sequence where he's learning how to get into the apartment block opposite where they're standing buying coffee.
I agree. That's handled lightly.
It's a training montage basically.
Right, and it's supposed to establish their friendship.
Yeah, but I feel like, and I agree, there is an imbalance between, or a discontinuity rather, between how Muir is in the flashbacks and how he is in the sort of present day segment. I feel like the key is meant to be Elizabeth Hadley, played by Catherine McCormack, who's Bishop's romantic interest. I feel like her character holds the key in depicting or being the sort of pivot around which both Bishop and Muir rotate. But I don't think it works. I
agree. So what we have in the present day segment is Nathan Muir breaking the law in a very, very serious way to help Tom Bishop, and I don't think that their friendship is established enough for that to make sense, given the way that Muir is portrayed as kind of like a very by the book and very coldly pragmatic, like company man sort of character in the flashbacks, with the exception of that kind of like light friendly, spycraft training sequence. But on all of the actual missions and the first act of the film, even it actually continues. It's more than that, really. It is this like summary of multiple missions, and it feels very kind of restless. It feels like where's the story here? Like, when do we settle into like an actual setting? And because I was actually looking at the blurb on Letterboxd, and it's completely wrong. It says not for the first time. It says veteran spy Nathan Muir is on the verge of retiring from the CIA when he learns that his one-time protege and close friend Tom Bishop is a political prisoner sentenced to die in Beijing. Okay.
Yeah.
Although their friendship has been marred by bad blood and resentment, Muir agrees to take on the most dangerous mission of his career and rescue Bishop. That's the exact opposite of what happens in the film. Like, there is no mission. Like, that's the whole point, is that the CIA are not going to carry out a mission to rescue Bishop, and he has to arrange it behind his back using his own finances.
You said you were waiting for it to sort of settle into its premise, really. or settle into some kind of
Well, I was like, because of
that,
because of that, I was expecting Robert Redford to actually go to China.
Sure, right.
Right,
So
I was waiting for that.
It's at the 70-minute mark of a 2-hour film where we get the introduction of Hadley as a romantic interest. So I like the idea, again, of a film hinging on a spy being torn between professional principles, especially the high-stakes principles, as one might encounter in international espionage, and torn between that and then a personal romance, right, or the pursuit of personal interests. But here it seems only to add to the convoluted plotting because of how late it's introduced. Like, it's a little clunky as a result, I feel like, and it's easy to forget again during that midsection that Bishop's being held in this Chinese prison cell. So as a result of that, you've got the very belated final act rush, if you like, when you're not really able to keep up with what Muir's up to. Like all these transfers, phone calls,
Did you find the third act confusing?
I
Like,
did.
I
did find it confusing.
Definitely.
But I don't necessarily have a problem with that if there's going to be some sort of cathartic payoff as a result.
No, you have a general impression of like what he's doing. You understand that he's gone behind the CIA's back to arrange this rescue mission. It doesn't really like. I was kind of going, wait, who's this guy he's talking to now? He's making all these phone calls to people, and you're like, what? Who? This?
And that has a certain sort of oomph to it, like a certain rhythm. But the emotional heart of it all is the fact that this is meant to be Muir's final day before retirement, and he's outwitting his colleagues. And it's not necessarily that he rescues his recruit and protege, and it's definitely not the fact that that recruit and protege and his own romantic interest like share this moment looking at each other from their respective helicopters in the final moments of the film when they are rescued. I just wonder if there was a way that more could have been made of that by integrating it better or more effectively earlier on. Because
the moment where they're in the two different helicopters and they're looking at each other across, and like it's supposed to be this like moment of sort of emotional payoff, but there's nothing. There's nothing there.
So Muir is, and Redford is the heart of the film, and despite his weird shift, which I don't think the script covers very well in terms of his character in the flashbacks and his character in the 1991 segment, I do find it quite a compelling performance. You know, it's witty, it's like humorous. There's a lot of funny moments here and nice touches of where, like, small sort of cathartic moments along the way. Like, you know, in the clip that we've just heard where it's very quietly establishing the various antagonisms that he's going to have to negotiate throughout the film. But I like it when, for instance, he invites, I think the character's name is Kepler, in the map room to his evening dinner. And Kepler says, "I didn't know you liked me." And like Redford just sort of gives this little chuckle. And then when he says to Harker, played by a very, very good Stephen Delane, "You've got something in your teeth," as they enter the elevator with one another. And then you see Harker kind of squeezing a tiny like moment in where he checks his teeth in the mirror of the elevator.
No, it's a good performance, and he's definitely the most interesting character in the film. You probably like spy films more than me, I think.
I think I do.
For me, it kind of depends on whether they are heavily plot-based, or whether they are either sort of focusing on... if they focus on spycraft, basically, I'm more inclined to like them, because that means that they're focusing on kind of suspense and action more than the information exchange.
Right.
Which isn't obviously the realistic one, which is like, that's actually what spying is, but
there's also something inherently more cinematic, I would argue, to one of those, and it is to the observational stuff. Like, you know, like trailing quarries on the streets and stuff like that. I love that kind of thing. You know, even in something like The French Connection, you know, just those elongated sequences of people walking down streets looking at other people. I'm a big fan of. This film, I don't know, just the weird, like, potted history we get of, like, these different tiny episodes of the Cold War.
So we have this present day sequence in China when he goes into the prison and he has this. They're pretending maybe they really are giving out some sort of
vaccination.
I don't know, vaccinations or something. Yeah. And he is trying to rescue Hadley, right, in that sequence, and then eventually gets arrested. And then we have the flashbacks to Vietnam. We have the flashback to the training sequence. We have the flashback to something happening in East Berlin, right? Or is it West Berlin?
Yeah,
it's West Berlin, isn't it? Because they want to get him back into the East. Yeah? And then Beirut, the long segment in Beirut. But in those different segments, you do have action. You've got the sniper sequence in the Vietnam scene. You've got like a race against time sequence in Beirut, and with the Lebanese militia. You've got that, and then you've got in the present day segment, you've got the kind of like, I would say, kind of minor key sort of suspense of Muir moving behind the CIA's back and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty light.
But all those action and or suspense sequences you referred to, they're not meaningful to the story as a whole, right? Because of how they're positioned and structured as flashbacks. So they might sort of advance character. And the Beirut one is meant to...
The Berlin one does, because that's where we discovered the sort of clash of moral perspectives between the two characters. But that doesn't really have any payoff, because... We just cut forward to 1991, and Robert Redford is a different character with a completely different disposition.
I do chuckle at the fact that they're meant to be having this sort of clandestine debrief on the roof, and Pitt, who just can't help himself and just fucking chucks a chair off the roof, presumably onto a street below. And I also like the fact that the whole story here is catalyzed by the fact that Bishop gives some chewing gum to an inmate in the Chinese prison, presumably to sort of like keep him like happy, or like just to prevent him from like screaming out and alerting guards. And that inmate, such is the unremittingly grim nature of the Chinese industrial complex, prison industrial complex, that he wastes no time to glean the visceral joys from chewing on the gum and blowing bubbles into it, which
is what gives him away.
Counterintuitively, just fucking really shitty basic spy stuff that Bishop like botches.
Yeah. And what about the style here? You can see like a lot of carryovers from Enemy of the State, like that scene on the rooftop meeting is shot with this like, swirling helicopter.
Yeah.
You've got a very, very eclectic soundtrack, this kind of like maudlin folk music, and followed by a Christmas song, followed by like a pulsing electronic track. That's all in sequence within about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it's in the Berlin, or the beginning. It's either the Berlin segment or the beginning of the Beirut segment. You get this like really bizarrely eclectic series of music cues.
Yeah, and like when locations are appearing on screen, you've got like the sound of like, it's not Morse code, but like as the letters appear on screen, you've got like that. And like. Not only
the sound a computer makes.
Yeah, it's like a modem, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And not only the helicopter shots that you've mentioned, but like the speeding up of that footage, and then
fast motion,
dramatically going down into like I suppose like 24 frames per second. Stylistically, I like it a lot more now than I did at the time, probably. I'm a lot more forgiving of it now.
Well, I mean, I bailed and I made it all the way through this time, so by default I have to like it more.
Did you watch it with your brother?
No. So, your rating?
I feel like the Office stuff is an 8, and the other stuff's maybe a 5. So, like, I'm going to say a 7.
Okay. I think it's probably a 5. Yeah, it's a 5. I'm going to go with a 5 on this one.
Okay.
So after Spy Game, the next film that Tony Scott directed was one of 8 short films produced by BMW Films, starring Clive Owen. The series is called The Hire, and Scott's film is called Beat the Devil. And they're, essentially like, 8 to 10 minute advertisements for BMW, in which Clive Owen plays a driver for hire. And in each of the short films, he, is tasked with a different mission. I saw these films, I don't know how long ago, years and years ago, just because it was an easy way to tick off a few extra films on my director lists, because it's a who's who of like A-list directors. It's John Frankenheimer and Ang Lee and Wong Kar-wai and Guy Ritchie and Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu and people like that. So I remembered thinking, when I revisited this earlier today, all I remembered really about it was that I remember thinking it was the worst film in the series. The only competition being Guy Ritchie's entry, which starred Madonna.
Right.
Star.
Do the others, because this one has James Brown as himself, and then ends, very funnily, you might argue, with Marilyn Manson also playing himself. But do the others, I mean, you've just mentioned Madonna there, but does Madonna play herself?
No, they're all pretty different. It's just that, I mean, Madonna was in Guy Ritchie's one because he was married to her at the time. It was the same year that he directed her in Swept Away. Yeah. Swept his career away. I don't know. I mean, like, you could argue that we talked about the visual style of Spy Game and kind of aligned it a little bit with where he was heading with Enemy of the State. But this one, in fact, I watched an interview with Tony Scott where he talked about making this film and the next short film that we're going to talk about, Agent Orange, as not just these two, but like advertisements in between films in general, as kind of like, laboratories for experimenting with his visual style. Yeah. And this one kind of feels like the beginning of something, I think, in its agitated kind of visual style. I mean, we're going to talk a lot more about this over the next couple of movies, but
yeah, and
I think this is rubbish. I don't like this at all.
It's we covered it was Pirelli, not a manufacturer of tires, right? In the Catherine Bigelow focus.
Yeah, we mentioned these films in reference to that.
And yeah, I mean, even just taken as a short film, it's just not that interesting. I mean, you've got Gary Oldman playing a version of Drexel from True Romance, you might argue.
Kind of. Yeah. He's playing the devil.
Yeah.
So the premise is that the driver has been hired to drive James Brown to meet this guy in this Las Vegas hotel. It turns out that the guy is the devil, and James Brown is sort of losing. He's lost his ability to do the splits, so he wants to trade someone else's soul. Apparently, he sold his soul for his talent and whatever to the devil 50 years ago or whatever. So he's going to trade his soul. He's going to trade someone else's soul for another 50 years, and he challenges the devil's driver, who's played by Danny Trejo, to a race down the Las Vegas Strip at dawn with his driver, played by Clive Owen, and then, if he wins, he gets 50 more years. He will instantly become 50 years younger.
Yeah.
And if he loses, the devil gets his driver's soul.
That's not necessarily nothing wrong with the premise. It's just like it's played for like wacky laughs, and
it's not funny. It's not funny at all.
And it's yeah.
Although you said it was you said you liked the Marilyn Manson.
I said one could argue that it ends on a funny note. I didn't say that I would agree with that argument though. But it's hilarious. No, it's just I mean it's just not very compelling. Like a drag race down a straight street, even that's not like cinematically compelling. If it's like a race across a city that requires some sort of skill, and I say that as somebody who's never committed to drag racing down the Las Vegas Strip, so it's easy for me to say. But it's just it doesn't really test Scott's credentials as an action director or anything like that. So
2 out of 10.
2? Nah, it's. I wouldn't say, like, with these shorts, I'm a lot more forgiving than you are. It's not like something that I would actively dislike.
But what about the visual style?
Well, I mean, so given that the whole thing sort of rests on this race, a race against the devil's driver, the images that seem to be sort of burnt into my brain have nothing to do with that, but of like Gary Oldman, like in a very grotesque manner, like being shown up close in his sort of warehouse-like abode. I mean, so in terms of like images, I don't know, but like in terms of style, like I think Agent Orange is a lot more developed Tony Scott's style with regard to the features that he was making at this point, or about to make at this point, a lot more than this film.
I think you can see a lot of it in this film.
Can you?
Yeah. But let's not spend too much time. What would you give this one?
5.
Yeah.
I don't really feel strongly either way about it, to be honest. But I was going to ask, sorry, are any of the other 8 films like more serious or stylistically interesting?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they most of them are. Yeah,
right.
Like if I was to recommend one, just like from distant memory, I would say John Frankenheimer's one, which was his final film.
Right.
Okay, so in March 2001, Scott was attached to helm something that Variety is just calling the Untitled Cuba project, and I can't find any other information on that, so I'm not sure what that one was. And then in 2002, July of 2002, he was brought on by Artisan Pictures to direct the spec script for a film called Tonight He Comes, which was a drama about a disaffected superhero who develops a relationship with a troubled 12-year-old. And I read that article and I thought, that's a weird title. And then I was like, read the logline and I was like, oh, that's Hancock with Will Smith.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's what it turned into. And then I remembered when it was announced. I remembered people laughing at the title. But yeah, so he was attached to direct that in 2002. Later in 2002, for Paramount and MTV Films, he signed on to direct a remake of Walter Hill's The Warriors, which he again remained attached to until the end of his life. And he was also attached to direct a film called American Caesar for Universal, which was described, this is actually in IGN via The Hollywood Reporter, is described as a modern-day Caesar and Brutus story set in the U.S. Army. In the story, a populist general takes over the White House, but things take a turn when one of his officers detects danger in the general's hidden mission. Oliver Stone had previously been attached to it, and then he was attached to direct an adaptation of Buddy Giovinazzo's novel Potsdamer Platz for Fox Searchlight, which was going to be written by the guys who wrote Sexy Beast. And that novel follows an American hitman, world-weary from a life of killing for the mob, who retires to Berlin. There he again puts his lethal skills to good use, protecting a Turkish real estate developer who is besieged by criminal elements from Russian and Eastern European crime families during an enormous construction project. So with the exception of Tonight He Comes, which evolved into, I think, quite a different script when it was eventually made by Peter Berg in 2008 as Hancock, with the exception of that, none of those films have been made. His next film then in 2004 was a film that he had actually tried to get made as far back as 1983, which was an adaptation of A.J. Quinnell's novel Man on Fire.
Came to get my stuff. Couldn't find my Bible. I thought it might be in here.
I borrowed it.
Okay.
It's crazy, huh? 1 week we're figuring out which nightclub to go to, and the next thing I'm reading the Bible.
It's a good thing. You hold on to it.
I keep thinking if only we hadn't. It's like my whole life, all I've ever thought about is what I could get for myself. My own baby. She needed me so much. Sometimes I felt like I had nothing to give her. Just, I don't know what to do. What are you gonna do?
What I do best. I'm gonna kill him. Anyone who was involved, anybody who profited from it, anybody who opens their eyes at me.
You kill them all.
Man on Fire, written by Brian Helgeland, based on, as Bobby said, 1980 novel by A.J. Quinnell of the same name. which makes this the second adaptation following a 1987 version directed by Ailey Cheraki and starring Scott Glenn. Produced this film by Lucas Foster, Arnon Milchan, and Tony Scott for Regency Enterprises and Scott Free Enterprises. Distributed by 20th Century Fox and released in the US on the 23rd of April 2004, and in Ireland and the UK on 8th of October 2004. It made more than $130 million at the box office from a $70 million budget. In a Mexico City racked by a recent wave of kidnappings, ex-CIA operative John Creasy, played by Denzel Washington, reluctantly accepts a job as a bodyguard for 9-year-old Lupita, played by Dakota Fanning, the daughter of wealthy businessman Samuel Ramos, played by Mark Anthony. Just as Creasy begins to develop a fondness for the young girl, a bloodthirsty gunman, played by Jesus Ochoa, kidnaps her. Now, Creasy must pick off a success of corrupt cops and criminals to reach his ultimate object of vengeance. That's the premise as per Google, which doesn't tell us that Creasy decides to enact his vengeance on the presumption that Lupita has in fact been murdered. So we'll start with a spoiler, I guess, and say that it turns out that she hasn't been murdered. Although it's a few killings into his killing spree, let's say, before Creasy realizes this or is told it. So I had seen this previously on, I think, a pirated DVD copy back when such things existed. I'm sure they still do exist. I wouldn't know. I'm not part of that market anymore. But
it funds organized crime.
It does fund organised crime. You should never pirate films. It funds terrorism, in fact. I think this is sort of Scott's... It's simultaneously his most epic film, somehow, and yet his most sort of concentrated and linear, with an intense focus on a single protagonist. I didn't like it first time around. I didn't take to it at all, and I think my instinctive response was against its style. So Creasy is established as somebody whose history as a CIA operative has left him an alcoholic, and he goes on these, night-long binges in his room, in his accommodation, and Scott approximates his sort of mindset, let's say, with all of these different superimpositions of the same scene, like kind of falling into one another. It's very difficult. It's easily seen than it is described, I think.
Yeah.
But it was my first sort of encounter with Scott's or with that kind of style, which we've come to learn or know since as Scott sort of having influenced it or developed it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because on the last episode, I said that it was redundant at, I can't remember what film we were talking about, to say that the film looks great. It was becoming redundant.
Yeah.
I think this is the point where I would say that this film is a mixed bag visually. But yeah, I was actually going to bring up that night of drinking montage as kind of the first moment where it's a little bit jarring how over the top it is.
Yeah.
Like how far he's willing to go with the. It's very easy to say stylization, but I mean that could mean anything. It's a very particular set of kind of visual tics that he's indulging in.
And I've seen people respond to this film negatively, both at the time and since, and bring up the visuals as this kind of incoherent editing, incoherent visual style. I actually find that, if anything, it's extremely precise, like intensely precise in terms of what it's doing. Like, it's actually difficult to make a film like this, I would imagine.
Right.
Whether or not you like that style,
Well, like I said, I think it's a mixed bag. I don't like the night of drinking montage style, and I don't like the way that there's a scene where they're talking to the kidnapper on the phone, and it's shot it's like this hyperkinetic editing and like agitated sort of reframing of every shot.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, superimposition of like, multiple takes, or maybe not multiple takes, but multiple duplications of the same image overlaid on top of each other. And, it's one, it's one thing to stylize an action sequence or something in that way, but this is just like two people talking on the phone.
And it is also two people talking on the phone who are subtitled arbitrarily.
Yes, with not only subtitled, but with stylized subtitles.
Yes.
Moving across the screen and appearing and disappearing behind objects and things like that.
I'm going to cut your fingers off, and the text gets sort of exponentially bigger as it appears on screen. So it is a bit of a departure for him, as you said in your pre-excerpt introduction. You mentioned the fact that Scott had wanted to make this as early as 1983.
Mm-hmm. He tried to make it, and nobody really knew who Tony Scott was at the time. And then it was made into a movie in 1987. So that was right after he became famous for Top Gun.
Sure,
it was too late for him to make it. And I was kind of wondering as well, was Revenge kind of the substitute for this?
Yeah,
very, very similar. It's Mexican set revenge thriller.
Yes. That spends its first half establishing the relationship that will then lead in the second half into the bloody rampage, whatever else. Please go back to our first segment, Tony Scott Part 1, and listen to what we have to say about Revenge. But what do you make of this then, in terms of its premise? I'm sure that we'll be coming back to the visual style and whatever else. But so Creasy, he's hired by this family, and he then spends, the majority of the first half of the film sort of being brought gradually out of his shell by Lupita, Dakota Fanning. What I didn't say is that Mark Anthony's character is also married to a woman played by Radha Mitchell, who obviously is American. So there's this, and she's sort of the reason why Creasy's hired, without hesitation, because he's American and whatever else.
Yeah. And also because he comes cheap, because he has an alcohol problem.
Yes.
Which he's just instructed by the husband to just not tell the wife about that. Because, the kidnap rate of, kids of wealthy families is so high, we're told, that, it's not only that she really wants her child to have a bodyguard, but there's a sense of, it's almost a status thing, you have to have a bodyguard.
Yeah.
A family of that status has a bodyguard. And he's inherited all of his father's debts and everything. And spoiler alert, it turns out that he actually orchestrated the kidnapping and was assured that the kid would not be harmed. He was told that she'd sit in a room and eat ice cream and play video games or something like that.
Yeah.
I like this kind of film. It's like the abstract kind of structure of it is of a lost cause who's given a reason to live.
Yeah.
Which then, through circumstances, is transformed into a reason to die.
Sure.
So the night of drinking culminates in a suicide attempt where he puts a 9mm handgun to his head and pulls the trigger, and the round malfunctions, and then he calls his friend, played by Christopher Walken, and asks him, what are the chances of that happening? And he's like, pretty much nil, that doesn't really happen. So we have a kind of almost like Pulp Fiction thing going on here with where all the bullets miss. Like I mentioned, that was originally part of the True Romance thing and Drexel and everything on our second Tony Scott episode, but a similar kind of thing where there's a miracle with bullets that results in that appeals to the religiosity of the protagonist and forces them to kind of take stock of their life in a different way. And the fact that the parents then leave him alone with PETA allows him to kind of bond with her and channel that kind of new sort of desire to live into sort of like not a project, but he does turn it into a kind of a project.
Yeah, he takes
it
it upon himself, and their bond
to
is
help her with her
swimming lessons in lieu of her piano lessons, which her father would prefer her to commit to, because he only has her future in mind. Yeah, I mean, like, and the growing proximity between Creasy and Lupita is further enabled by the fact that her father's kind of this distant guy who doesn't really have much time for her. He's a businessman. We get the sense that he is a little corrupt even before it's revealed that he was responsible for the kidnapping per se.
Yeah.
Obviously, Mickey Rourke's in this film, kind of in a role that he doesn't really have much to do, but so it's all set up, right? For obviously what then happens in the second half of the film, which is an elongated revenge sequence, basically. So I find that appetizing, having set up a simple enough revenge narrative. But it's also a bit of a detective narrative as well, whereby every new victim Creasy comes by is also in a position, after a bit of torture, to tip him off regarding the next fella up the chain, which gives the back half of the film a kind of repetitive quality. So he's not just like, driving up to a compound and murdering everyone. He has to work his way up to find out who the guy responsible for the kidnapping is.
Yeah.
So my question then to you is, did you feel that it was a little repetitive? And secondly, do you think the film's visual, or perhaps just sort of, do you feel like each scenario is sufficiently different to combat that repetition?
I would say that I prefer the first half of this film to the second. I think they make an effort to distinguish one, interrogation, torture, murder scene from the others by kind of making them a little bit outlandish, like with the one where he puts the bomb up the guy's ass.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I remember actually not liking that at all when I first saw the film, thinking it was just silly and trying too hard to be kind of edgy and cool. And it kind of is, I suppose.
Well, he does that thing also when he walks away from the
walks
camera
away from the explosion
behind him.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I kind of agree with you that it's. See, the other thing is that it's not just a revenge story; it's also a vigilante story, because there's this repeated refrain from everybody that he encounters that I'm just a businessman, I'm just a professional, I'm just doing my job. So it starts to take on this, like, cleaning up the streets kind of theme. Where it's
which is nicely offset by the presence of, like, the policeman and the journalist as well, who are kind of helping Creasy, but also hoping to intervene upon this horrible, ruthless systemic corruption before he gets to kill everyone.
Yeah, so exactly, you're right. That underlines it. But the problem is kind of that I think the most enjoyable and engaging relationship in the movie is between Creasy and Peta, between Denzel Washington and Dakota Fanning in the first half of the movie. And that is, once that personal relationship is severed when she's kidnapped, the ostensible replacement is between Creasy and Mariana, the journalist, which just doesn't have the same, resonance, I think.
Yes.
It's a little bit reminiscent of, like, the cop who knows Charles Bronson's, like, real identity in the Death Wish films, and kind of, like, lets him get away with it and just, tells him to get out of town for a while and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
She's like a journalist who's trying to do the right thing, but she knows what Creasy is doing.
And she's trying to, this is another thing as well, because a side point perhaps, but she's trying to do the right thing by publishing the face of the man known as the Voice. So the kidnapper, the top guy in the chain, is known as merely the Voice. And they're going to publish his face on the front of the newspaper. And then her life is threatened, like, don't do this, like at gunpoint. Why they don't just kill her, I don't know. And then nothing really comes of that, because she just publishes it anyway, And then, like, similarly, nothing really comes of Walken's character either, who is, like, Creasy's this Okay, Walken is also a former CIA operative, we're led to believe, if not told outright. And he makes it clear to Creasy that, he's out of the game, he's not going to get involved in anything like that. But at the same time, it's his pal, and he's going to be there for him should he need any help otherwise.
Yeah.
And Walken just disappears.
He gives him access to all the guns and stuff that he needs,
Yeah.
all the weapons.
And then that's it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you think of Washington and Fanning in this?
Well, I'd recently watched the Equalizer films, both of them, and then watching this, I was like, "Oh, this is like this could be like a film that preceded those two in terms of like the same character." Again, another spoiler: Denzel Washington's character dies at the end of this film. He didn't at the end of the novel because there was a series of sequels.
We don't see him die in this. Oh,
Yeah,
we
do.
get the on-screen text though.
Yeah,
we get the on-screen text saying that he's dead. Yeah.
He dies in the car on the way to the compound. They're going to kill him.
Well, I mean, he might not die though.
Well,
He
he
I mean,
dies.
yeah, you're right. He dies, but we don't actually. The only confirmation that we get that he dies is that on-screen text that says, Creasy fucking whatever it is, 1960,
yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, we should talk about the ending actually. But before we get to that point, I like both of them in this film. I like Washington, and I really, really like Dakota Fanning in this. I think she's great. In a role that's obviously a very, very difficult to play, but also in the kind of role that I would ordinarily feel very easy to despise.
Yes.
I
think I really, really like her in this,
Yeah.
and I think that they really sell the relationship between them. I watched the original film from 1987, and the relationship between Scott Glenn and I can remember the name of the actress who plays the character's name's Sam in that version. Sorry, we should say that the novel and that original film are set in Italy.
Yeah.
And this transplants the action to Mexico.
Yeah.
But that relationship is depicted very strangely in a very kind of like quasi-romantic kind of.
Is she older?
She's 12. How old is Dakota Fanning? In this
9.
one? 9. Okay, so yeah, she is a little bit older, but still not old enough for Scott Glenn.
No, absolutely not. And Scott Glenn is maybe even older than Denzel Washington is. I don't know. Anyway, that doesn't need to be qualified. It's
No.
yeah.
There's a strange kind of like uncomfortable undercurrent to it that I don't think is intentional at all. I just think it's a very kind of European thing.
Right.
But it's Joe Pesci is in that film as well and plays the Christopher Walken role and has an absolutely hilarious moment where he plays Johnny B. Good on an acoustic guitar at a wedding and then gets stuck on the word go and just keeps saying go, 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 go until Scott Glenn has to come in and stop him. It's very, very weird.
Yeah, there's none of that in here. Although I do love the sequences very early on in which Creasy, Rayburn's partner, and Lupita are all just sort of hanging out and having a good laugh. And it sort of endears you to not only these characters as individuals, but characters in a particular sort of social layer in this foreign landscape, which is otherwise not painted with much warmth, which I find is hilarious. When at the end of the film,
I was just going to say,
with thanks to Mexico City, a very special place,
yeah,
having opened by establishing the fact that a child is kidnapped every 60 minutes.
Yeah,
but the ending itself, I think, I have to say, I find it terrible. The ending.
Which aspect of it?
Okay, so it doesn't really make any sense, right? That he's suddenly relying on Lisa, right, with Rhoda Mitchell, Lupita's mother.
Mm-hmm.
I get the fact that he hasn't really got many other options, but to draw her into this scenario in the way that he doesn't really feel true to the character who otherwise has his wits about him. So he gets her to sort of assist him in the trade-off. So he agrees that he's going to give the brother-in-law of the voice, he's going to trade him for Lupita and himself for Lupita.
Yeah.
He's agreed to give his own life in order to save the girl, right? So how does he also then trust the voice not to kill all three of them? like by which I mean Lisa, Peter, and Creasy. Like, because that could very easily happen. He has no real bargaining power there, and then
he seems to hold all the cards when he has it's his brother or his brother-in-law, I can't remember, and his so that would make the woman his sister.
Yes,
his pregnant sister, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, he has like I felt the same way at that moment. Why does he agree to give himself?
So there's that, right?
Like he has both of them, you know.
There's that. But then why don't they just kill him? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like,
do they want to torture him or something? Is that why they're taking him back to the compound?
Well, yeah, maybe, but like, why would they then let the Peter go and Lisa go? And it just doesn't make any sense for that. For Creasy to do that, to go into that deal, and then for them not to maximize the opportunity to just off everyone their potential witnesses and otherwise, it just doesn't really make any sense to me. And then you've got that thing that you've just mentioned with the birth and death dates for Creasy, and a really, really laughable, cursory wrap up about how the voice was killed in the course of arrest, with this black and white shot of the cop dude shooting him into a swimming pool, and then a death date for him too. It's just like, I know there was an alternate ending shot where they do get to the compound, which is why I think watching the alternate ending confirms the idea that Creasy dies in the car, holding the necklace, the same necklace that Peter bought him, because in the alternate
the patron
cut,
saint of lost causes.
That's right.
Yeah.
In the alternate cut, they do manage to get to the compound with him still alive, and then he reveals that he has one of those bombs that he put up someone's arse earlier in the film, and he blows the whole compound up. So, takes himself out and everybody else in the alternate ending. But it's equally cursory, and it doesn't really justify why he goes into that scenario anyway. Like, it just doesn't make any sense, man. I get,
but that would make more sense, because it would mean that the voice wouldn't then have the ability to kill Peter and Lisa.
Yeah.
So I wonder why they didn't go with that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I can get,
because if he has the opportunity to kill the voice, then I understand why he would do that, because once the voice is dead, then Peter and Lisa are safe.
Yeah.
So I'd be satisfied with that ending. So,
I get that.
You watched that on YouTube, did you?
Yeah, I get that the idea is that the character is by that point, willfully agreeing to his own death in exchange for the life of the young girl, and I get that it's meant to be, again, very sort of in this 60s 70s European sense, the existential fatalism that he sort of embodies by that point. But you need to write it better than that, though. Trade-offs like that are never easy to sort of dramatize in a plausible way, and it isn't. It just isn't.
No, I agree. I think it sort of doesn't really lock together on a plot level, but I do think it works thematically. Like I said, a reason to live that transforms into a reason to die.
Sure.
Let's talk about the visual style just to finish up. So we have, like I said, hyperkinetic editing and jump cutting with constant flashes to white.
Yes.
Like this agitated reframing, zooming, jump cutting, slow-mo, fast-mo. The cinematography by Paul Cameron is good. And it reminded me a little bit watching the sequences that are very, very chopped up and sort of tinkered with, of watching Peter Greenaway's Prospero's books with Sasha Vierny's beautiful cinematography and then this horrible semi-opaque picture-in-picture overlay in the middle. It just completely ruined the image. It reminded me a little bit of that kind of thing, where it's like, the cinematographer did a really great job, and then the director came along with his editor and kind of ruined his good work. How do you feel about all that stuff, though? Like, the constant flashes to white really annoyed me.
Yeah, I mean, anticipating them, I think, equips you somewhat to sort of disarm yourself of any sort of prejudice against them. But I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about it, I'm guessing, on the next feature, Domino. I do find, I guess, In fact, actually, you know what? Watching this, I was surprised by how sedate some of it is.
It's not anywhere near as
yeah.
Dominated by that kind of visual style as I remembered it being.
Yeah,
Domino, on the other hand.
especially when he achieves sobriety or something resembling it, it does become sedate after a while.
But like the scene, the night of binge drinking and the suicide attempt, and like just to focus on that as kind of like encapsulating all of the visual techniques that we're talking about. Do you find that aesthetically pleasing, or not pleasing is probably the wrong word because it's not really supposed to be?
Yeah.
But do you find it appealing in some way?
Well, it's not invisible in the way that direction is meant to be in narrative cinema, right? It utilizes cinematic tools in a way where they draw attention to themselves.
Yeah, but that doesn't really answer the question as to whether it's aesthetically appealing on some level.
So no. So I think it's deliberately. I think that it's avant-garde strategies in a film that isn't avant-garde, and so I do find it quite ugly.
Yeah, I think it's pretty horrible. I don't like it at all. And there are plenty of film techniques that call attention to themselves and very much sort of like, bring the director, into the spotlight. Like it's like a sequence shot, for example.
Yeah.
But I don't think that really has any relevance to whether it's appealing or not. It's just here. It's just like I don't respond to it well at all. But like I said, it doesn't take up. Last question: is this film too long?
146 minutes, is it?
Yes, by far his longest film.
Yeah. I mean, for what it is, I opened by saying it's simultaneously his most epic and yet his most linear and most sort of. It's if anything, like Revenge, which we covered on the first segment, is the film that should have been 146 minutes long, not Man on Fire, because, as I said, the back half of the film is just this sort of procession through. I remember in 2005 when you first saw Munich and you found that kind of interminable. Whatever you might think of it these days, you thought the Spielberg film was interminable. And you've mentioned Greenaway this segment, but you likened it to like a Drowning by Numbers parody, sort of like the film ends when their list of targets gets to 0, and the problem is that they keep fucking adding to the list. So
yeah.
And Man on Fire is a little bit like that.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, I think it is too long.
Yeah, so for me, my only real complaints with the movie are that it's too long. It spends too long on both sides of the story, and the visual style is verging on annoying here. Okay, your rating?
7.
7, okay. That's higher than I thought you would give it.
It's higher than what I thought I would give it before I watched it. But yeah, I could very easily watch this again.
I'm going to go with a 7 as well. Yeah, overall, okay. I do like it.
Okay.
All right, so in late 2004, Tony Scott produced one film for Amazon Theatre, which was, I believe, Amazon's first foray into film production. It was called Agent Orange. I'm pretty sure it's 5 minutes long. Certainly the version I watched was 5 minutes long, although on a couple of different places, including IMDb, it says 16 minutes. I couldn't find anything to substantiate that. I'm pretty sure it's 5 minutes.
I mean, there's nothing textual to support the idea that it should be 16 minutes either.
No, but the other 4 films, like the longest of them is 9 minutes.
Right.
And these were designed as kind of all-purpose advertisements for Amazon as a retailer. So the credits at the end of the film not only list the people involved in making the film, they also list all the products featured in the film. Mm-hmm. And you can then, click on, these were released 1 week apart across like November, December, I think, of 2004. And every Tuesday you could go to the Amazon.com homepage and watch this film. Watch a new whatever. So what did you think of this one?
I mean, it's sort of like a silent movie, isn't it? Because it's telling the story of a girl meet boy story a boy beginning to dress.
It's a girl who has orange hair and orange fingernails and like whatever, and she drops her camera as she gets onto the train, and the boy picks it up, and as the train doors close, and he takes a photograph of her on the camera, and then he starts showing up to the train station every day, and every day he's wearing more and more orange, and he dyes his hair orange and looks like one of the extras from the Real Slim Shady video. But like, I mean, like I've seen a lot of comparisons to like Wong Kar-wai or like Chungking Express or something like that, and you can kind of see it in terms of the, I don't know, orientation to the material. But this is like we said, Scott using advertising projects as laboratories for experimenting with stylistic techniques that he was then going to bring into his feature films. And really, that is, I haven't looked at any of the other advertising that Scott did in this period, but if you take Beat the Devil, Man on Fire, Agent Orange, Domino, there's a very clear trajectory.
Yes.
So this is bad. Like, it's just rubbish.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. Like, I'm not going to argue with that, and, like, there's no real way in which to, like, unpack anything from it, because it doesn't really have much to unpack. It's an advert, you know, and it doesn't really have any...
Yeah, I mean...
any interest.
But forget about the fact that it's an advertisement. Take it as a 5-minute short film.
As I did with Beat the Devil, yes.
Like, it doesn't have any sort of punchline, or like there's no twist or anything like that. They just like bump into each other on the platform at the end, and they both say hi, and then it says happily ever after in between.
Yeah, but they don't say hi. We have speech bubbles.
Oh yeah, but you know what I mean. Like in terms of the premise, there's no.
No, that is.
It doesn't like the setup doesn't evolve. Like it's just not good on any level. So like, what do you think of the style here? Is it beguiling?
Well, no, because it's annoying, and it's not in service of any emotionally involving idea. So it's merely a thing. I mean, it just doesn't. It has no real impact on me at all.
But it's not a beautiful thing.
No, it's not. I mean, yeah, it's not like drawing you in with. Yeah, it's just fuck it, it's shit.
It's better than Beat the Devil.
Is it?
I don't know. They're both bad. I give this a 2 as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
7. Nah. I mean, I honestly, it's really difficult to sort of evaluate these kinds of films for me, like in any sort of, like, I'm not sure how I'm meant to feel about them. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I'll just go 5. Like, I don't really feel
5.
anything either way. Yeah.
So you wouldn't say that you dislike it as a short film?
Yeah, maybe I would. Maybe it should be a 4. Maybe it should be a 3. Maybe I'll give it a 1. I don't know. Like,
well, you don't have to rank this one, so you can just
4.
4. All right.
4. Yeah.
In the period between Man on Fire and his next film, Scott was developing an adaptation of Emma's War, which was to star Nicole Kidman, which was about a young British relief worker, Emma McCune, who came to the Sudan determined to make a difference to a country decimated by the longest running civil war in Africa. Also in this period, he was making another attempt at getting his Tom Mix and Pancho Villa epic off the ground. He said, "This is Lawrence of Arabia meets the Wild Bunch, a huge film with trains, cavalry, thousands of soldiers in uniform and on horseback. This is a love story between two men from different planets who educated each other. Pancho Villa knew the laws of life, and Tom Mix knew how to live in a modernized Western world." Variety also said the director is on a 5-year quest to make his 3 dream projects. First up was Man on Fire, a project he developed for 20 years before making it with his Crimson Tide star Denzel Washington. Scott hopes to follow with Tom Mix and Pancho Villa, then turn his attention to the William Nicholson scripted Universal drama American Caesar. But his next film was 2005's Domino.
Bishop's attorney had put his boss in business with the mob.
They're asking for a finder's fee.
Finder's fee?
That's bullshit. Sounds like an inside job to me.
Could be. Who knows if this Claremont Williams is in on the heist or not. All I know, if this joker delivers the first ladies, we'll split the $300,000 fee with you.
All right, gentlemen. Sounds like we got a little situation here.
Quite a mess indeed. Beckett had just brokered an underhanded deal with Sigliuti. The 10 million, en route from LA to Vegas, belonged to the mob. Bishop's clean reputation was a great cover for laundered cash. If the FBI could link the two men together, it would be the takedown of the century.
Okay, here's the plan.
The FBI was always listening, hence the underwater cordless.
You get the bounty hunters to take these first ladies to the Sam Kinison Monument. And needles? I'll tell you what we're gonna do.
Okay, so Domino, written by Richard Kelly from a story by Kelly and Steve Baranchik, based on the real bounty hunter Domino Harvey. Produced by Samuel Hadida and Tony Scott for Scott Free Productions, Davis Films, and Metropolitan Film Export, and distributed by New Line Cinema. Released in the US, UK, and Ireland in October of 2005. And worldwide grossed $22 million from an estimated $50 million production budget.
Ouch.
This was also, 2 in a row here, this was also a long-time passion project of Tony Scott's, because he had befriended Domino Harvey in the mid-90s, and had always kind of wanted to make a film based on her life. Domino died in 2005, and this film is dedicated to her memory.
Yeah, just before the film was released.
Right, yeah, but obviously wasn't written and produced posthumously. It was...
yeah, she's seen at the very end of the film, isn't she?
Yeah. Alright, so in this film, loosely based on a true story, Domino Harvey, played by Keira Knightley, a former model, is now a bounty hunter who has been arrested for robbing an armored car. During interrogation, she claims innocence and tells her story. Harvey became a pupil of Ed Mosby, played by Mickey Rourke, who ran a course for aspiring bounty hunters. Along with Choco, played by Edgar Ramirez, the three of them became a successful team and had their own reality show called Bounty Squad. But in the course of the production of their TV series, they accepted a job from a bail bondsman played by Delroy Lindo, which involved them becoming embroiled in a complicated frame-up involving the mob and other things. So this is the only bad film that Tony Scott ever made, and it's not only bad, it's unwatchable. Agree or disagree?
But you watched it.
I watched it under. There were numerous times in the film where I had a very, very, very strong urge to just turn it off. Agree? Disagree?
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's his only bad film or bad feature. But it's the culmination of the style that we've been leading up to all through this episode.
Just to be clear, bad for me means less than 5 out of 10. So
yes.
It's the same for you. So okay, so
sure.
We're interesting. Okay, but you haven't given a less than 5.
We haven't given a less than 5 so far. No.
Interesting. Okay, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, it's the first time he's worked with a kind of auteur writer, if you like, or a distinctive voice since The Last Boy Scout and True Romance. So Richard Kelly, who I know, whose Southland Tales I happen to know you really, really disliked at the time.
So this was his second project. I was a big fan of Donnie Darko.
Yeah.
You know, I guess kind of around 2003, 2004, whenever it sort of broke out. I know it's a 2001 film, but it took a while for it to sort of catch on.
Yeah.
The reason I never wanted to see Domino, despite it being written by Richard Kelly, and I think it was just because of how much I disliked Man on Fire at the time, and also wasn't a fan of and I'm not a fan of Keira Knightley, and it turned out to be right.
Yes.
You know,
so
I avoided it for 13 years.
Yes, it's sort of a deal gone wrong film, whereby it operates again like Spy Game by a flashback structure, with narration that reaches even further back than the sort of meaningful components of what constitutes the plot or the premise, to give a sort of expository overview of her life so far, like her upbringing, etc., etc. And it actually made me think immediately that Knightley is fundamentally miscast.
Yeah, absolutely. And horribly miscast.
It's weird, though, because I say something like, I would have said that without hesitation in 2005. I say it now with hesitation only because I assume it to be a prejudice of my own against that accent and the social associations that it embodies for me.
Choco.
Quite a mess indeed, as we heard in the excerpt just now. So there's 3 relationships in this film, borderline 4. Domino's to the FBI interrogator, played by Lucy Liu. So like there's this sort of structuring device that it keeps coming back to, and on paper at least, a certain battle of wits between them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got Domino's to Rourke as a sort of father figure and de facto boss. Then you've got Domino's to Choco, played by Edgar Ramirez, with whom she is a pal, to whom she's a colleague, and eventually becomes a lover, of whom she becomes a lover. And then I said borderline 4 because then you've got her relationship to her mum, I suppose, played by Jacqueline Bisset. Then you've got all these different characters, none of whom we know a great deal about, and so Domino's at the centre of it. And obviously it's a character and a performance that demands a certain charm. I don't know if charm's the right word, but whatever it demands, Keira Knightley doesn't have it for me.
No.
In this role.
Are you generally a fan of Keira Knightley or not? Accent aside.
No.
No, neither am I really. Even in like something like a Dangerous Method, I found her kind of grating.
Yeah, isn't she good in Never Let Me Go?
Oh yeah. I don't remember. Well, I mean, I don't know if she's good or not. I just don't remember finding her irritating in that.
Yeah. So, I mean, this film is a mess, I think, in terms of...
Well,
sorry.
Yeah. No, I watched an interview with Richard Kelly, who said he described the film as like Tony Scott is controlling your TiVo, and suddenly you're in Afghanistan, suddenly you're on the Jerry Springer show, and he had a few other examples or whatever where you're just hopping around. I was like, that's pretty accurate, but that's the intention of the script is to kind of engage in this sort of weird sort of postmodern crime story. But like they even have like 2 of the actors from Beverly Hills 90210 are in it playing themselves, and they get embroiled in this ridiculous crime caper.
Yeah, so the opening on-screen text is based on a true story, and then the sort of pathetic follow-up to that is sort of on screen. So,
and one of the closing lines is, don't ask me what's true or not, I don't give a fuck, or whatever it is.
Yeah, but that's established throughout, like this sort of unreliable narrator that, nevertheless, as you said, takes us to a segment in Afghanistan because the driver
of the bus always wanted to fight in the revolution or something like he was too young, and now the twist is that he sent the money back to fucking to Afghanistan for some reason.
And then you've got a Jerry Springer segment on race.
The mixed race flowchart.
Yeah,
which is like an SNL skit or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I found it actually quite prescient of the discourse. And then, I mean, Scott's described this film in terms of the real life milieu that he's depicting is inhabited by people who are always on speed, and so he wanted to approximate that. And you might argue that effectively he does that to a fault. I wouldn't know. I've never been on speed, but there's this sort of breakneck, all cylinders approach that paradoxically I feel underserves the attempt at sort of social like commentary. So you've got Christopher Walken here again, right? Who, and I'm going to use him as an example. He's funny.
Yeah, he's playing the TV producer.
He's even, you might argue, hilarious. But there's always a sense with Walken that he's given 110% in a film that in a sort of otherwise, low-key film that isn't sort of engaging in this sort of hyperkinetic cinematic style. Or in a script that's heavily drenched in over-the-top satire. And so here, it's a weird thing to say, but I felt almost a bit sorry for him. Like, he wasn't in on the fact that his performance is being sort of undercut by this style. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, the film's sort of reaching for this satirical punch that I don't think Scott does particularly well as a director.
No, I agree. I think you can make a comparison between that and like what I was saying about the Tarantino relationship in True Romance, where it's like it's just a mismatch. But I mean, it's not a mismatch. You said a strong authorial voice, but like there's certainly a kinship between this film and Southland Tales in their kind of scattershot attempt at social satire and postmodern political discourse. But you wouldn't say that really about Donnie. He hasn't made enough films really to say much about him as a filmmaker in general. But actually, The Box does go in that direction as well. So maybe so.
But you've also got the film sort of climaxes with a standoff, which brings to mind True Romance and Enemy of the State again. Yeah. But it plays out to Tom Jones, right?
Mama told me not to come.
And again, that sort of personifies everything here plays out like some sort of frivolous caper, which is, obviously the intention. But it's a mess.
Yeah, that's an understatement. You said an unreliable narrator, because I was watching the film, trying to, I think it's funny that you started off there saying, like, these are the core relationships in the film. That's something that I always do, where I'm, like, trying to come to grips with the structure of something, particularly when the structure is elusive. Yeah. But I was doing the same thing with the narration. It was like, okay, so we have a framing device. But then she started narrating events that she wasn't present for. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. And then it cuts back to her being interrogated, and she starts narrating the interrogation scene as well. So the narration is not originating in the interrogation scene. It's obviously all part of the structure of the movie, or the rejection of structure or structural principles. So it essentially, I would essentially describe this as like a tribute to Domino Harvey in a sort of an idealized form. Which makes it a kind of character study, but it's a character study without a compelling protagonist, which I think is largely attributable to Keira Knightley being miscast. And it plays out like a little bit like 2 hours of plot summary.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of Casino long before it uses the same musical cue in the end to that film. And it's obviously a disastrously unfavourable comparison to make for this film, because Casino has a stylistic control that counterbalances the sort of excess that's depicted in the film. You've got like funny details. Like, so here's the thing: like, I associate speed, not the drug, but the actual like narrative rhythm of speed, with like force, right, and with humor. And you've got like funny sort of details that, if you're paying attention enough, and I guess the film sort of encourages a certain hyper attentive mode of spectatorship, but like you've got like stomach squelching on the soundtrack when Mickey Rourke's talking about it, like his irritable bowel syndrome, like those kinds of that kind of attention to detail on the part of Scott. But I would say it's not sort of narratively meaningful in any way, and I don't really find it. I also have to say that I in the middle stretch, I had a great deal of trouble staying abreast of the plot, and then I felt up to speed again, and then it lost me again with about 35 minutes to go, to the point where they're all heading to the rooftop of the casino. I had actually no idea why. I was like, what like, who the fuck's like who are the actors in this like scenario? And then when the standoff develops, I was like, who's who here? Like,
yeah, I just didn't care at that point.
Yeah,
or actually long before that. But
would you know what I mean if I said that? I would agree with you that I didn't care either. But my first instinct when that's the case is to think of it as a shortcoming on my part, not the film's.
I have no shortcomings. I know what you mean. Like, I kind of feel that way about spy movies.
Yeah.
You know, where I just sort of like, it's just, but it's not like you couldn't follow it if you really, really wanted to. It's just like caring is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And like, you just, like 20 minutes into this film, I didn't care. I think that like there's a certain promise in the opening sequence where it sort of promises like a strangeness and an excess that it doesn't really deliver on. Like when they have the severed arm with the code on it and a bunch of guys like chained up inside their Winnebago or whatever it is.
Did it remind you in any way of like Breaking Bad? Like,
yeah,
you know how like Breaking Bad
lines,
takes
yeah.
like it's the sort of image-based premise of, you know, this teacher in his underpants in the very first episode, and then sort of works back and, you know, tells us how this came to be.
Yeah.
Like,
you also have Mickey Rourke on the toilet while she's opening the safe and all. It's
yeah.
But it's you know, the plot is all standard crime tropes. So the merits of the film are all about style and character. And as we've already discussed, the character, at least the main character, is not interesting or compelling. So let's talk about the style then.
Yeah.
So this takes all of the most unappealing visual tics of Man on Fire and applies them across the whole film.
Yeah.
Like this agitated style, this like acrid, like yellow-green lighting, like nuclear waste colored lighting.
Yeah.
And you know,
subtitles.
The subtitle. But like I said, the reason that I wanted to stop watching it wasn't because I didn't care about the characters or it was just like a boring story or anything like that. It was the style. It was so off-putting. Like, it's the first Tony Scott movie that doesn't look good, and not only does it not look good, it looks terrible. It's a horrible looking film.
Yeah, I worried watching this that because this is none of the other films on this episode, including this one, I had seen before, and I was. We'll get to the other films in due course, but I was relieved after watching this that I had wrongly come to associate, you know, late Tony Scott with this style that this film sort of brings to a conclusion. I thought the rest of his filmography was going to play out with this sort of, you know.
Well, I think if this had been a hit, and if it had been well received, you may have seen him continue down this avenue. But I think he sort of checked himself a little bit.
Yeah.
And was like, okay, people don't really want to see me go further down this road.
Yeah.
Because you're right, you're absolutely right. Like the next three films, it's like, oops, sorry about that. You mentioned something about 35 minutes before the end.
Yeah.
That's around the time that the RV crashes in the desert and Tom Waits shows up, and there's a Tom Waits song blaring on the soundtrack, and they have this like spiritual moment around I was so over the film at that point. I actually checked the time and I was like, I thought that was the end. And I was like, oh my god.
Yeah,
that's the end of the second act.
Up, and then sitting down with them and like telling them, you know, that the whatever he's saying, I don't know, but like, oof.
It's like it's meant to be like a vision or something like that, almost like a, you know, like spirit quest or whatever sort of vision.
Yeah.
Like the whole film is structured around surrogate viewers as well. Like everybody watching the goings on and reacting to it.
Yeah.
And being kind of like wowed by their antics, like how crazy these bounty hunters are.
Yeah.
As though that's supposed to kind of, and I mean, it's a device used in a lot of movies, you know, that we sort of are put in the position where we're identifying. Now, again, I'd be careful about mechanically relating a viewer in a film. Like, they're not necessarily surrogates, but here I think they are, and we're supposed to be kind of they're like say Christopher Walken and Mena Suvari's character, the two TV producers, are in the TV van watching the live camera footage coming back of them, like the bounty hunters, like, you know, apprehending their bounties.
Yeah.
And they're going, wow, oh my god, this guy's so crazy. And
he's so attractive.
It's I'm having the exact opposite reaction to it. It's just not. It's. I think it's an interesting insight into what the filmmakers think about the film and what they're depicting.
I read it as Kelly trying to embed the action into this social comment, like political commentary. So this is, you know, made in 2004. Like when sort of the media landscape's just beginning to become absolutely saturated with reality TV shows, and the more outlandish, the better. And I think you're right. Ultimately, that it's inevitably sort of positioning or guiding its spectatorship, but it's not doing it in any kind of meaningful way. And I think it ultimately does fail, like, because nothing really comes of it. Like, the reality TV thing just gets ditched as soon as the script isn't really, as soon as like the script sort of tires of it emotionally, it's ditched. Well,
it's once it's revealed that they've been suckered into kind of like actually doing something illegal, where as in collecting bounties on people who had never even been arrested.
Yeah.
And they've been told that they've been killed, then that they've been handed over to the mob and executed, because they're supposed to be the first ladies, which is a Point Break. I know you hated Point Break, but they're a Point Break reference. Where they dress up as, you know, the first ladies.
Yeah.
So yeah, at that point they just tell them to turn the cameras off and they blow up the TV van.
Yeah.
I noticed you didn't object when I said you hated Point Break.
Well, I mean, it's a lot worse than this film.
And at the end of the film, I kind of found it like strange that there's this sick child, and the whole thing sort of like it's like, okay, so structurally, the emotional core of the film is this sick child whose mother can't afford the operation that the kid needs.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, fucking hell, I forgot about that.
And then, but it is like when you look at like how the film kind of comes to it, like how the scenario emerges.
Yeah.
It all originates with them, because it's the real first ladies are that mother and her three friends, who Delroy Lindo's character, the bail bondsman, has like orchestrated this robbery, and then he's gonna ask for a $300,000 fee to return the $10 million that they've stolen, and it's a scam that goes badly for them. But it's all these like fractured fragments that are kind of like in an extremely loose orbit around this. They're so loose. It's like you forgot about it. Like and you do forget about it. And it never lands emotionally. And then at the end of the film, you have these two like revelations where Domino tells Choco that she loves him. You know, and it's like, it's just so meaningless. It's just not there in the movie. And then she also says, my mission is complete. I saved her. So her mission all the way through was to save this sick kid.
Yeah. There's no real payoff there. The script on the level of dialogue is annoying, actually. So you've got that line that's repeated at least twice, or it's repeated once, it's said twice. There are three kinds of people in the world: the rich, the poor. And like when that was said, I was thinking, okay, how's this going to end? It's going to be, she's going to say, and those in between. And she said, and those in between. And I'm not like saying that as a smug way of like, you know, boasting that I knew that I could predict how the line was going to end. But I was like, surely it's not going to say that. And that's it's delivered in this way as if it's like, you know, if it had been Casino, it would have said something like daft, or like, you know, to sort of reveal like the sort of the banal stupidity of the people involved. But here it's just like it's delivered as if to say, as if it's going to be some sort of like philosophy, like, or revelation, or profound, you know, renewed way of looking at the world. And it's It's a tricky one. I said at the outset here that I didn't dislike it, and I wouldn't go so far as to say it's his only bad film.
You didn't dislike it?
Well, I suggested that it wasn't. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was Tony Scott's only bad film, which would suggest that I was going to give it less than 5 out of 10. And probably at the time of recording, I'll stress, probably wouldn't give it less than 5. I don't know. It's a tricky one.
I mean, I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I think the only thing in the whole movie that I liked was that little underwater phone booth that they have with the cordless phone.
Oh, that we just heard in the exit.
Yeah, for making phone calls from underneath the swimming pool. Like, it takes forever to get going. It goes on forever. But like the main thing is just the style. Like if it was not such a horrendously, unwatchably ugly film, I could sit through it and go,
See,
okay, meh.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because I've watched, all the other Tony Scott films up to this point in watching it, that I'm willing to sort of extend some benefit of doubt to it.
How do you mean?
Like so just repeat myself. Like I don't want to dismiss the film on those terms. I don't know. I'm kind of trying to actively negate my own intuitive or instinctive response to it.
1 out of 10.
5 out of 10.
Okay.
1. Fuck.
Yeah. Okay, so Scott's next film was 2006's Deja Vu.
We can look back 4.5 days.
And what? We can look anywhere?
Limited radius.
Right. Looking into the past.
In a sense, we're always looking in the past. Even light reflected from yourself in a mirror takes some time to reflect back.
Let me get this straight. You're trying to tell me that on the other side of this bridge is the actual past?
Yes.
Yeah, but look. We created this thing by pure accident, all right? This space and time, this time window is a complete fluke, all right? And everybody is terrified of screwing with it for fear of losing it or suffering the consequences of God knows what, which is why it can only be used as a retroactive tool.
Hey, let me ask you something. Is she alive or is she dead?
You went to her funeral,
I know
dog.
that, but I think the question still applies. Is she alive or is she dead?
All right, life, like time and space, is not merely a local phenomenon.
All right! Am I asking a hard question?
Looks like I picked a bad week to stop snorting hash.
All right, I tell you what. I'll speak slow so those of you with PhDs in the room can understand. Here, look. Here's a monitor, right? Now, the monitor is broken. It's dead. It is not temporarily transitioned to another state of entropy. It's dead, right? Now, is she alive or is she dead?
She's alive.
All right, now we're getting somewhere. All right, now you said light could go back. What else?
Deja Vu was written by Bill Marsally and Terry Rossio, whose spec script was sold for $3 million against $5 million, setting a record at the time for the highest price ever paid for a screenplay. The film was also produced by Jerry Bruckheimer for Touchstone Pictures, Jerry Bruckheimer Films, and Scott Free Productions. Distributed by Buena Vista Pictures, released in the USA on 22nd of November 2006 and on the 15th of December 2006 in Ireland and the UK. Made for $75 million, and it took $180.6 million at the box office. So back to profitable form for Tony Scott. Called in to recover evidence in the aftermath of a horrific explosion on a New Orleans ferry, federal agent Doug Carlin, Denzel Washington, gets pulled away from the scene and taken to a top-secret government lab that uses a time-shifting surveillance device to help prevent crime, or to help investigate crime. The device leads Carlin to the terrorist responsible, played by Jim Caviezel, and also to Claire Kocheva, played by Paula Patton, one of the terrorists' victims whom he killed in the immediate run-up to the ferry bombing and whose death he tried to cover up as part of the ferry bombing. A difficult one to synopsize, as time-travel films often are. This film opens with such an amazing opening sequence. It actually recalled to me, the opening of Die Hard with a Vengeance. When you've got a sort of a scene unfolding, and then you're off. You're wrong-footed by just an explosion that completely sends that scene into chaos.
Although we do in this one
we get more warning of it.
We do get more warning of it. The guy discovers the truck with the bombs inside.
Yeah, and even before then, certain kinds of attention are given to certain
it
scenes
plays
of like innocence.
Yes, exactly. It plays out like a scene of impending disaster.
Yeah.
Whereas the street scene that you're talking about in Die Hard with a Vengeance, I know the scene you're talking about.
Yeah. But anyway, it's 10 minutes before we get a meaningful line of dialogue here.
Wordless introduction. Yeah.
And it's by Washington. I mean, we get one by the captain of the ship, but then it's 10 minutes before Washington says something into his phone. So we might call this cinematic, if you like, or intensely visual in its storytelling or scene setting or whatever. And as the premise suggested, it's a very high concept film. But it's also, I think, like the beginning, which gives us a clue as to how cinematic it is. It's an intensely cinematic premise, like that's based around a crime investigation that's time sensitive in nature, but which employs and depends on a kind of single take, all seeing surveillance cam that takes so long to render, we're told, that its footage is always 4 days and 6 hours ago, or in the past. So it's all seeing on the one hand, as I say, but has a temporal delay and therefore a serious limitation on the other hand, which amplifies Carlin's need to study, interrogate, and digest visual information. So it has a sort of cinematic component built into its very premise.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen this before. Had you?
No, neither had I. And I don't know why I never saw it, because I remember when it came out that I wanted to see it, and it was also on TV a lot in the few years after that. I don't know why I never... Not sure.
It's kind of... I think this and the Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 have very similar poster designs. Like, so Denzel Washington's in the top half of the frame, then of the poster. Then you've got like the title, and then in the lower half of the frame, like different bits of chaos, floaty heads, and all that. And it never really appealed to me. This, like, looking at stills from it, looking at the poster, knowing that it had come immediately after Domino, which, even though I hadn't seen at the time, was then happy to tarnish the idea of watching a Tony Scott film with. I regret not seeing this actually at the cinema, having just watched it for the purpose of this episode, because I really, really, really enjoyed it.
Okay. Yeah, I liked it as well. So this is the first and only science fiction film that Tony Scott ever made, and it's only the second film he ever made that has a fantastical premise. After The Hunger, everything else he's done has been, obviously heightened and exaggerated and so on, but rooted in the real world.
But does it reveal its cards as a science fiction film for a while? Does it?
Well, it kind of does it. I mean, the technology that they're talking about is already sci-fi, but it's a much lower grade. But then it's revealed that the device that they actually have is actually a wormhole that allows them to look into the past, but it also means that they can actually send... Their theory is that the only thing that can pass through it is light. Now, I don't know what's supposed to be happening to all the light that's in the room that they're in. Does that appear to Paula Patton in the past as a kind of a weird sort of ghost or something? But yeah, there was a moment about probably halfway through this movie where I thought, wow, I actually love this film. Where it was turning into this kind of like, murder mystery mixed with a disaster movie, with this like sci-fi ghost story, time travel, very novel, very unique premise. And the only real issue is that, and also it's satisfyingly rule bound as well. Like the way that they set up everything.
Yeah.
I was actually initially, because I knew that it was a sci-fi film, so when they reveal the initial sci-fi premise of, it's taken from 4 different satellites and it's a computer simulation or whatever, I was kind of thinking, first of all, it's clearly real people. It's not a computer generated image. So that's just kind of silly. So I was kind of a little bit disappointed initially in the banality of that. And then, but I love the way he doesn't really believe that that's what it is. Yeah. And they're kind of distracted for a moment, and he kind of surreptitiously takes out his laser pointer and just like flashes it at the screen, and Paula Patton sees it, and then the whole system crashes.
Yeah.
That's a great scene.
Yeah, it's great. I also love the speed with which he sort of falls for her. which is obviously very reminiscent of Preminger's Laura,
right?
And the necrophilic edge that's built into that. Like
I thought of Vertigo.
Okay.
And also wrote down necrophilia.
Yeah, but like, so you've got a detective falling for the person whose death he's investigating.
Yeah.
And there's that conversation between Kilmer and Washington when Val Kilmer, who's the cop who sort of brings Washington on board, when Kilmer tells Washington to go home and jump on whoever he's got, and Washington replies saying, you lose everything you've got, etc., etc. The job teaches you that, and that no matter what they do, they will lose her. They will lose her. So I didn't know that this was a science fiction film going in. And I'm making notes on it, and I'm getting completely into it, all the text stuff and the innately cinematic component that I've just mentioned. And then like 51 minutes into it, you then got to sort of adapt to this revelation as Washington himself does, as we heard in the clip just now, that this tech is made possible due to space-time disruptions and time folding and literally looking into the past. So it turns into a science fiction film, and then it unlocks.
Yeah, they use that explanation with the piece of paper that they always use.
Yeah.
Normally we got to go from this point to this point. Then we can fold space-time.
But it's like grabbing it into the Mississippi River. Because it then sort of unlocks the preemptive possibilities of the tech. So it then turns into a little bit like Minority Report, right? Or at least hints towards that kind of use of technology.
Right. He wants to catch. He says he's been trying to catch people for his whole career after they do something horrible, and for once he'd like to catch him before he does something horrible.
Yeah. And so I love all that. I thought it was great. Very easy, I think, to mess up.
Yeah.
And I love how Scott, we've talked about how after Domino he began to rein it in very much. And he sort of plays it straight in a way, like the it's outlandish the way it develops after the 50-minute mark. But
right.
The style doesn't change, if you know what I mean.
No, it's really, really noticeable, and it's I'd be very surprised if it wasn't the huge commercial disaster of Domino and the critical backlash that really just made him consciously go, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But it's all to the film's benefit. So one of the rules, one of the limitations of the technology is that it only has a particular range, like a geographical range.
Yeah.
And the best scene in the film, I think, is the car chase, where Denzel is chasing Jim Caviezel, who is 4.5 days in the past.
Yes.
And he's wearing a headset that is feeding back to the guys who can then see. The headset allows him to see 4 days into the past. It has a battery. It has a. Well, he can see because he puts the visor down, and then he's suddenly not able to. He has to drive with one of the visors up, and he has this like battery pack that he wears to get out of the car. He's like a Ghostbusters proton pack.
But it's also allowing the guys back in the tech room the radius allowed
to see. They can only see 4.5 days into the past, so they're seeing everything as it was. And he turns up to this place, and it's like a derelict, burnt out building, and he says, like, what are you guys seeing? And they're like, oh, just like it's intact, an intact structure.
Yeah.
But like it's almost like reminding me of like Ghost Chase mode on like Super Mario Kart or something like that. It's like and then he has this like headset thing and a proton pack thing, and it's very, very silly and played very, very straight. Yeah. And it's really satisfying. I think it's all of that is a really satisfying, like the establishment of the rules of this technology, and then like a problem introduced into the application of that tech, and then a solution like, oh well, we can do this, and these are the limitations of it, and like really rigorously and logically exploring the possibilities and the implications of that technology. For me, the place where it falls down is when it actually becomes a time travel film, which takes a long time. There's some talk about it earlier on about like, we can only send light. Any like living organism that you tried to send through would be would have it all of the electrical activity in its body would be shut down, and that would include your heart and everything. Yeah. So they send him through with "Revive Me" written on his chest into the hospital. But I just think the initial premise is more interesting than standard time travel, because it becomes a standard time travel film. So the period when they're kind of following the logic of the premise, like Terminator style time travel, where he has to get into this weird little capsule thing and go get projected back into the past. That's not part of the logical implications of the technology that they have. And I would have preferred that they just continued to explore the implications of that tech, and that he never got to meet Paula Patton's character.
Claire.
And the unusual premise, it kind of recedes into the background in the third act.
It does. If you accept the idea that we're not going to return again to the future, if you like, I found it quite refreshing, actually. So I know what you mean, but it chimed nicely for me with the theme of hubris that emerges, which reminded me a little of actually Twin Peaks: The Return, of going back to correct what has happened, which again chimes nicely with that very potent chat about destiny between Jim Caviezel's terrorist and what's he called? Colin.
Mm-hmm.
When they do actually finally catch, or not finally catch, catch the terrorist, but still haven't prevented him in the past from blowing up the ferry. And I love Jim Caviezel, actually. I've never seen him in this kind of role before, but I think he's really amazing in it.
It's quite similar to that film he made with Dennis Quaid, Frequency, where
which I never saw.
They play father and son, and there's a weird sort of electrical storm or something that allows their radio signals to travel through time. It's like a serial killer movie where his dad has to try to stop a serial killer, and he's in the present trying to look at the case files and help him in the past. I remember that being pretty good.
But Caviezel's got this, again, I've never really seen him in this kind of role, but he's got this, he delivers that sort of self-mythologizing, transcendent yet banal quotidian immediacy of a holding cell interrogation. That he's got that sort of peril threatening tone, and I suppose a self-aggrandizing nihilism that made the Christopher Nolan's final Batman film tick along quite nicely. That level of, peril that Bane represented. But I didn't feel that it faltered as much as you did once it turns into a conventional time travel film, although I do understand your qualms with that, because we can start connecting the dots and can begin to see things ahead of Colin, and we can begin to see his actions as quite hubristic, as doomed to failure or disappointment, not despite his actions, but because of them. So we notice the ambulance in the shack that he comes upon at the end of the great chase sequence that you referred to, and then once he works up in the ambulance, we know that we realise then that that's going to be the ambulance that he himself drives. So you've got all that kind of easy superficial joy of decoding things. But I do think it works because I like the ending. Where he does die, and yet he doesn't die because in the things start to square up again. The only thing I was a little bit wary of is it ending on such a primarily optimistic note.
I was going to say that it's not haunting enough.
Yeah.
It's too happy.
Yeah.
Too uncomplicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it doesn't hit. It seems to be going for a note of profundity that it doesn't hit.
Mm.
Yeah.
lots of other smaller things to like as well. Like, I mean, I love Washington's performance as this sort of straight talking, guy, federal agent who's I love it when he's asking the other officers, when he's confirming to them that it's a crime scene, because he's found something on the scene that confirms dubious activity, and then he's asking who's in charge and where the coffee pot is, etc. And this, like, he's got this. Washington's so good at like delivering like politely withering dialogue.
Yeah.
And I love the chemistry between him and Val Kilmer's character as well.
Val Kilmer's good too, yeah.
And between his and Adam Goldberg's character.
I thought Adam Goldberg was going to be an asshole.
Yeah, but
he's actually not.
Yeah, and I find it refreshing that it's actually, there's a similar relationship he has in Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 in the next film. But that moment where Goldberg decides to help Washington. And Val Kilmer, his superior, tells him to turn out the lights when he's done. And it's disappointing that is the final scene that we see Kilmer in. He doesn't return after that, but so be it. But yeah, no, I would agree that it doesn't end on the haunting note that it teases at early on when he sort of falls for the murder victim.
Yeah. I love you mentioned the scene where he comes into the police station. He's asking where the coffee is and everything, but I love the scene where he's introduced to Bruce Greenwood, who's in charge of the investigation into the he's in charge of the investigation into the disaster, isn't he?
Into the ferry, yeah. But Washington comes in and says this is related to it. Her murder is related.
That's what I mean.
And if you chase down that, you'll solve yours.
Yeah, and he lays out the kind of confounding information about like, in order to wash up where she washed up, she would have had to have been killed like 4 hours before the blast or whatever. Yeah. And that's when Adam Goldberg comes over and he's like, before the blast? Because he's obviously got the time travel tech and everything. But
I like it also when he...
And Bruce Greenwood says, and do you have a theory about this? And I kind of was expecting him not to have a theory. But he has a really robust theory that explains like how she was killed and used like whatever exactly it is. It's about like killing her and making it look like she died in the blast and
then when he exits scene, Greenwood asks Kilmer, "Do you like him?" And Kilmer goes, "Yeah, I do." And Greenwood goes, "Yeah, I like him too." I like it because
he's smart.
It's so easy for these kinds of characters to be antagonistic. But I like it when I find it refreshing when their chemistry is defined primarily by cooperation and collaboration.
We should say that this is post Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah,
and it's very much like that's the kind of the topic. It's like a disaster, but the idea being that it's like that was a natural disaster and this is a terrorist attack and so on.
I love that post-Katrina landscape. It's a landscape in which criminal activity can and does go uncovered because of the very nature of the topography. And I love it. It's very reminiscent of True Detective as a very general milieu.
Have you seen Source Code by Duncan Jones?
No.
You might like that.
Yeah.
It's a similar kind of premise.
Yeah.
Okay. Your rating for this one?
8.
Okay, I'm going to go with a 7.
Okay,
so in October of 2007, Scott was attached to direct a film for Fox 2000 based on Don Aronoff, or Aronov, the inventor of the cigarette boat, which is a term that we just both had to Google because we had no idea what it was, and it's some sort of like long, thin speedboat. Aronov was a self-made millionaire, businessman, and powerboat racing's world champ for 10 straight years. His cigarette boat became a favorite of Colombian drug smugglers looking to import their product into Miami in the 1980s. Aronov got a $20 million contract to build boats for U.S. customs agents to catch the smugglers. He was eventually gunned down in 1987 in a mob-style hit in Miami.
Right.
So that was the only project that I could find in between Deja Vu and his next film, which was a remake of the 1974 film The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
We all owe God a death, and I'm a man who pays his debts. Are you a man who pays his debts?
Yeah, sure. TV, cable, and my mortgage. That's a little like dying once a month.
Oh, you're married. You're married, man.
Maybe.
No, you're married, man. Married men have mortgages.
What about you? You got a mortgage?
Well, I don't know, Garber. Why don't you tell me, then we'll both know.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure someone out there loves you dearly and, would be worried about you. Like I said, you're in a motorman's cab, you got no cover, sniper on the way.
Well, circumstances are my protection. Because right now, hostages are good insurance, by the way I see it. I'm pretty well protected. This reminds me of being in a confessional.
Are you Catholic? I'm married, you're Catholic.
Maybe, I don't know.
You're Catholic. And a good Catholic, would know that he's got a train load of innocent people. I mean, you don't want to kill innocent people, do you?
No. A good Catholic knows that nobody is innocent. And I'm not going to kill all these hostages. I'll give up my leverage.
I hope you know what you're doing.
Okay, so The Taking of Pelham 123, written by Brian Helgeland and based on the novel The Taking of Pelham 123 by John Godey, produced by Tony Scott, Todd Black, Jason Blumenthal and Steve Titch for Relativity Media, Scott Free Productions and Escape Artists, and distributed by Columbia and MGM. Released in North America in June of 2009 and in the UK and Ireland in July. Estimated production budget of $100 million somehow, and a worldwide gross of 150, so another flop. Okay, so the premise, as per Google, chaos reigns in the New York City subway system when heavily armed criminals led by a mastermind named Ryder, played by John Travolta, hijack a subway train and threaten to kill everyone on board unless a large ransom is paid. Dispatcher Walter Garber, played by Denzel Washington, uses his extensive knowledge of the transit system in a bid to outwit the hijackers and save the hostages. But one question remains: even if the hijackers get their money, how can they possibly escape? So, Tony Scott's second remake, after Man on Fire. A remake this time of a much better film.
Yes.
I love the original Taking of Pelham 123, directed by Joseph Sargent, who later went on to direct Jaws: The Revenge. You've seen that, haven't you?
I've seen Pelham 123. I haven't seen Jaws: The Revenge.
Oh, you haven't lived.
I almost said Jaws: The Revenge of Michael Myers. The Taking of Pelham 123, Joseph Sargent's, is great.
Yeah.
I really, really love it. This one is, let's say, faithful enough to also be highly likable. Obviously, it's the kind of project that you can cast many different good actors in different roles. So it is a two-hander in many ways, a bit like Crimson Tide in the fact that you've got Denzel Washington and then you've got John Travolta. But it's also, the MTA, not headquarters, like, what is it, like a control room? But, you've got, like, different people of authority who need to sort of have presence. So you've got John Turturro as the Lieutenant Caminetti, who's sent as the hostage negotiator. You've got James Gandolfini playing the mayor. You've got Michael Rispoli, and James Gandolfini's boss in The Sopranos actually played Jackie Aprile, who plays Garber's boss here, Denzel Washington's. So it's a film that is simultaneously concentrated in its sort of premise, but also unfolds in such a way that it comes to drag in different perspectives and become a film about a city, which very much appeals to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I saw this shortly after it came out, and I didn't particularly like it. And I remembered, going back to it this time, I remembered John Travolta being terrible in it and almost like single-handedly sinking the film. I think I probably overreacted, although I do really object to his use, not so much his use of the word motherfucker, but the frequency of his use of it and the way that he says it. It just sounds wrong coming out of his mouth. It's just like it's a word that he's never said in his life before. And he says it, he must say it 100 times in this movie. And every time he says it, I cringe. So, like, I gotta say, almost all of the notes that I have written down here are just comparisons between this and the original.
Which is something that I wanted to resist.
Okay.
I deliberately didn't rewatch the original on the run-up to this. because I wanted to untether myself as much as possible from any attachment to it.
Well, sorry, I don't mean that these are all like negative comparisons. They're just observations. They're just differences.
Yeah. But I wanted to free myself even of that kind of comparative mode.
Okay. So you don't want me to read out any of my notes?
No, of course, yeah.
The first thing to say is that in the original film, the villain is played by Robert Shaw, and he's first of all, he's a cipher. We never learn anything about him, and he is like preternaturally calm and in control. And Travolta's the opposite here. In fact, you know what? In terms of both Garber and Ryder, each of them is less in control in this film than they were in the original. Whereas Garber, I'm not sure if that was the name of the character in the first film, but
Zachary.
Right, okay, and he's in charge of the control room.
He's a policeman.
Yeah, he takes over the control room. He's like, there's no question of his authority in that situation. Whereas here, there's this additional plot where Garber has been accused of taking a bribe, and he's been temporarily demoted, pending, investigation, and he's about to be suspended with pay, taking a bribe to choose Japanese trains over Canadian trains. And also Ryder comes across as being much less in control. And like here, Garber has an antagonistic relationship with his boss.
Which has to sort of be mitigated somehow by his developing relationship with the hostage negotiation expert who arrives, Caminetti, played by John Turturro, who actually at the beginning, very reasonably, I would suggest, suspects Garber to be in on it.
Yeah. So the suspicion of Garber, that's another additional thing. So I think in a way it's a more complex film, and it's certainly more psychological than the original. Mm-hmm. It's devoid of comedy, though, whereas the original has a very, very, very strong comedic vein running through it.
That's true.
Which surprised me when I rewatched it, particularly the way that the film ends. It ends on a comic beat that's almost like something out of Columbo. I won't spoil the end of that movie for anyone who hasn't seen it, but we have obviously also, and I think an important thing to point out is the premise in the first film is that New York is broke in the middle of a financial crisis in 1974. Here, this was made right on the cusp of a financial crisis, but there's no question of like New York can afford $10 million, whereas in the original, I can't remember, it's $1 million in the original, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, where are we going to get that from?
Yeah.
But so it was filming began in March of 2008 on this. So it's interesting though thematically, because the whole scheme here is also much more complex. It's like he's put $2 million into, I don't understand the stock market at all, but he's put $2 million into something or other, and basically if he causes a disruption in the stock market, like a terrorist event in New York, I think he makes like $300 million or something like that at the end.
Profit somehow.
So there's this, and we learn, like I said, he's not a cipher the way that Mr. Grey in the first one was. That's another thing.
Mr. Blue, no?
Is it not Mr. Grey?
Mr. Blue.
Whatever the color of Robert Shaw's character was, but that's another thing. They don't use those color nicknames because they can't, because Tarantino took them and used them in Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
But so he's trying to manipulate the Dow. So I mean, I think they profitably sort of build on the basic premise of the original film, and I think the film is pretty good. I still don't like Tarantino. I still don't like Travolta in it. I think he's miscast.
Well, I was surprised and pleased that he at least is speaking in something resembling his own accent, because for all other purposes and appearances, I'd seen him in Killing Season, in which he's absolutely like terrible. It's almost as bad as Robert De Niro in that film, but he plays like, I think, some sort of Serbian or some sort of European mercenary anyway, and is speaking with a European accent. And because he has that weird like false facial hair. And he looks like he did in that film. In this one, I assume that he was also a European terrorist here. So when he's speaking like with, an American accent, I was like, okay, so at least I don't have that obstacle to get over in order to sort of be engaged by the performance. I don't think it's a bad performance by Travolta. I've definitely seen him worse than this.
What do you think about his use of the word motherfucker?
Motherfucker? To be honest, I hadn't noticed it, or at least not the frequency with which he drops it. Okay, so you've got quote unquote this film is a flashy film in comparison to the original, which was defiantly unsensationalistic, like even down to Travolta's appearance. Like at the same time, it unfolds in such a way here that its thematic touchstones are sort of understated or underplayed. That whole thing that I referred to of like making this plot about a city, or a city at a particular point in time. Maybe again though, it's I don't know if this is related to that or if it's a different point entirely, but the idea that this is a propulsive hostage negotiation thriller that's fast and had a wonderful rhythm to it on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, a film in which very little actually happens. I love that dramatic challenge. I love 10 scenarios playing out over phone connections. And when you're having to cut between control rooms and, the early stages where they're just trying to make sense of what's actually happening. That thing where Paul Greengrass is usually very, very good at doing, like in United 93 and whatever. Like, so the sense of a situation developing very rapidly, and given the recent history of terrorism on American soil in New York in particular, the way these things are grappled with and digested, I think is really good. And the fact that Washington, again, is at the very center of it is great because he's an excellent actor. Watching all these films for the purpose of these Tony Scott episodes has really sort of made me realize how much I love Washington as an actor. This is like sufficiently very Washingtonian, the character, but it's very, very different to like something like, say, Man on Fire. Like, he has a vulnerability here. He even cries at one point in this film when he is sort of pushed to admitting on the phone that the thing of which he's accused is actually true. Like, he did take bribes.
Yeah.
So I all of which is to say that as a film that is predicated upon good actors being in certain roles, I find it a very enjoyable film to watch. And I haven't even mentioned or discussed in any great detail Gandolfini's performance, which is this weird, actually quite unusual role. Like,
I forgot he was in this.
Like, I think his character's finally quite endearing, or meant to be.
So he plays the mayor.
Yeah, the New York mayor, but it's quite comically. He's quite comically, indifferent. Like,
that is actually
fed up.
I said there was no comedy in this one, but there is. His character is definitely like
when it cuts.
It's not played up really, but his his comic indifference to the fact that he's not running for election. He's served his term.
He doesn't give a shit. When they're like, because they get him on the like the subway line, the elevated car, and they're like, you got to get off here. We've got to get you into a car immediately. And he's like, the subway will get us there quicker. Like, he's just very like straight talking, and then somebody in the car like calls him maybe you're not a douchebag after all.
No, because they said they're going to take the subway, so they're going to skip all the stops between here and whatever. And he's like, whoa, we're going to make all the stops. Everybody's going to get where they're going.
Yeah.
Maybe he's not such a douchebag after all.
I like it also when it cuts to him in the car, when he is finally in a car, and he's like, this first line of the scene is like, how's my hair? And he's leaning forward. Obviously, James Gandolfini barely had any hair on top.
Yeah.
And it's like very unflattering the way he's sort of like motioning towards the camera. But my question was going to be, for all that there's very little action here, and for as much as I love and appreciate that, it does lead me to ask the one point of departure that I could discern, having only seen the original once a few years back, is the ending here, which pits Garber, who isn't a police or lieutenant as Walter Matthau was in the first one. He goes running about New York City streets armed with a gun, and he's merely a dispatcher, at this point. And he's running around trying to chase down Travolta. Do you find that engaging or plausible?
No, I don't particularly like the ending here. I kind of had mixed feelings about the ending of the original as well. I don't want to spoil that one here, but it's a strange ending. The original, like I said, it ends on a comic beat, but before that, the actual resolution of the how the aftermath of the hostage situation plays out is kind of peculiar. Here, it's much more sort of standard, I think. It reminded me a little bit of the Brad Anderson film The Call with Halle Berry, where she's a police dispatcher, and she ends up leaving the what they call the hive, and pursuing the killer. And it's like, you can understand why they do it. In the case of that film, it's like halfway through and it transforms the movie from a psychological thriller into like almost like a horror film. I think this film's underrated. We should do Brad Anderson, actually.
Yeah, a lot of his films are underrated.
So no, I don't really. I think it's a lackluster ending. Partly down to Travolta's performance as well.
Partly down to that, but also partly down to Washington being so good to a fault, as this, ordinary bloke, who's, trapped in the control room. To see him then, taking it upon himself to hunt this antagonist down doesn't really ring true given his performance previously.
Yeah, I mean, it's an effort to turn what was a thriller into an action thriller.
Yeah.
In this case. Like I said, I don't know how they spend $100 million on a film like this that mostly takes place in a train carriage and a control room.
Yeah, it's those like brief, admittedly brief moments like outside of like fucking Hyatt in New York, like, and Grand Central, like just any street scene, I guess, in New York would cost a lot of money to,
Yeah, but not at $100 million. I mean, it's crazy. Like, it's such overspending, and like.
Well, I mean, obviously they had to pay Ryder his ransom fee though as well.
That's true. That's $10 million, yeah. But I mean, I feel the same way about the girl with the dragon tattoo, which cost something like $95 million to produce. Like, it's a thriller. Like, it's like $30 to $50 million budget range. Like, if you spend double that, of course it's going to flop.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to say, I mentioned in relation to The Last Boy Scout that I miss those kinds of movies that are like, kind of a little bit excessively gory, and this one has some good squib work in it, and Tony Scott knew how to use a squib.
Yes.
Some good.
You mean like the suicide by cop at the end, and
yeah, or stuff in the train tunnel as well.
Yeah. Well, do you think more could have been made of the passengers? Which, if I recall correctly, more is made of them in the first film. Like, they become, something resembling characters.
Yeah, there's more characterization in that as well.
Chris Parlow from The Wire is here.
Isn't it? Yeah, he has. It's kind of him and that woman. They have a little exchange, and then there's also the kid. That's another additional thing, is that there's a teenager. Yeah. There's a teenager on the internet with his girlfriend, and he drops the laptop and it keeps streaming.
Yeah.
It doesn't really come to anything.
Yeah. I mean, he even asked at one point, like, should they even be getting like a internet connection down there? And they're like, no, definitely not.
Yeah, but they set up an internet thing.
Yeah, that's true. But he, at that point, has lost internet connection, or it's like it's scrambled the feed.
Yeah.
And, we know how these things work. You don't get reconnected automatically. But anyway, I mean,
Anyway. Okay, so your score for the
7.
I'm going to go with a 6.
Okay.
Alright, so then in October of 2009, Scott became attached to direct a film about the rise and fall of Steve Banerjee, the man responsible for creating Chippendales, who was consumed by excess and competition when the male strip clubs became a phenomenon in the 1980s. It was described as having a tone similar to True Romance, and it would have followed the improbable rise and fall of Banerjee, who went from pumping gas in Culver City to running a high-end nightclub that evolved into Chippendales. After hiring a New York choreographer to polish the all-male dance troupe, Banerjee became wildly rich as well as unreasonably competitive and paranoid. Banerjee hired a hitman to murder the choreographer when negotiations went sour. After being arrested, Banerjee died in jail awaiting trial.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So his next film his next and final film was 2010's Unstoppable.
This is 1206, over.
Frank, you're right about the derailment. They're planning an attempt outside of Arklow.
Tell them idiots it ain't gonna work. That portable derailleur is worthless.
So she already told us.
Frank, this is Oscar Galvin, VP of Operations, patched in at his request, open mic.
Yeah, we are derailing 777, Frank. It's a done decision. Like it or not, it's our best option at this stage. There'll be less collateral damage in Arklow. It's already being evacuated, and we can't let 777 make it to Stanton.
Look, Mr. Galvin, with all due respect, I've been railroading 28 years. I'm telling you, we got a real chance to stop this thing.
No, we already tried.
That was from the front, where Long Hood lead back. It's a different situation. We got more control now.
What if I cancel the derailleur and you fail, Frank? Huh? That train will be doing 70 miles an hour into that elevated S-curve in Stanton. The damage will be 100 times worse.
Right. I'm just telling you, the portable derailleur is worthless. You got too much train traveling entirely too fast.
Maybe 1206 should just stay on it as a backup.
Look, I am not jeopardizing more personnel and more property just because some engineer wants to play hero. End of discussion. That train is our property. It's our decision. Now you stop your pursuit or I will fire you.
So Unstoppable was written by Mark Bombach and produced by Julie Yorn, Tony Scott, Mimi Rogers, Eric McLeod, and Alex Young for Dune Entertainment, Scott Freak Productions, Prospect Park, and Millbrook Farm Productions. Distributed by 20th Century Fox, and it made $167.8 million at the box office from an estimated budget of $85 to $100 million. Released in the US on the 12th of November 2010, and in the UK and Ireland 10 days after that. When a massive unmanned locomotive roars out of control in Pennsylvania, the threat is more ominous than just a derailment. The train is laden with toxic chemicals, and an accident would decimate human life in the immediate area and cause an environmental disaster. The only hope of bringing the train to a safe stop is in the hands of a veteran engineer, Denzel Washington, and a young conductor, Chris Pine, who must risk their lives to save those in the runaway's path. Inspired by real-life events. So I hadn't seen this previously, and had, I think, through association to Scott and the one-sheets and posters and artwork that was going around, doing the rounds at the time of its release, presumed that it was another action thriller in which Chris Pine was this devious little bastard antagonist, and Washington was yet again another sort of tough guy, Tony Scott hero. And the first thing to say that is definitely not the case here. It's, a film without any kind of antagonist, which is of immediate interest. Like, so for perhaps the first time since maybe Top Gun, Tony Scott is making a film without any real go-to, villain. So it's a film about cooperation and collaboration, which I said really appealed to me with regard to Deja Vu, again to a different degree, Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. And it's about people having to communicate with one another, mostly from disparate locales. So you've got Rosario Dawson as well here, who plays like the train yard master, who's like in charge of, where the train should be and how and whatever else. And in, the clip we've just heard is in the event that it wasn't clear to those who haven't seen the film, it's like taking place across different spaces. So you get, that whole thing of changing sound when you excerpt the sound from a clip. I really liked it. It reminded me of something like The Wages of Fear, of having to transport dangerous goods through perilous scenarios in a landscape and whatever else. So I love the milieu, the workers, the railroads, a kind of cartography that is coming together. Locations inscribed on screen, maps on the news, on boards in the control room, cross-cutting between these spaces. And yeah, I mean, obviously it was very, very much unlike anything I'd come to expect from it. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is very, very different to what I was expecting. And I was liking it because of that, but I was also liking it as the film grew on me for, on its own merits. It wasn't just that it had, undercut my expectations.
Yeah. I'm really fond of this. I really enjoy it. I had seen it before and liked it, and I liked it more this time. I think you can kind of take this as being a spiritual sequel of sorts to Pelham 1, 2, 3, in that obviously it focuses on trains, but also it plays out as a post-recession story, whereas Pelham plays like a pre-recession story with this corrupt, investment banker manipulating the Dow and everything in New York, and here it's, the company is forcing people who've been employed there for decades to take early retirement so that they only have to pay them half benefits, and then they're bringing in younger, people on obviously not as robust contracts and so on.
Well, there's a great moment in the clip we've just heard culminates in Washington telling the boss of the firm telling Washington that he'll be fired. And I cut the clip at that point, but Washington subsequently tells him, well, you already fired me. I received my notice 90 days ago. And there's
No, I received my 90-day notice 72 days ago.
Sorry, yeah. And there's that great moment of Chris Pine's character, the younger one who has taken up one of those, less robust contracts that you just mentioned, sort of responding to that. Like there's a reaction shot, and he realizes at that point the rationale behind or that underpins Washington's sort of fraught, suspicious antagonism towards him up to that point.
Yeah. I actually love that scene because, so obviously there's this theme of like class conflict and so on in the movie, but I love the fact that the only power that Vice President Oscar Galvin has over them is the power to fire them, and neither of them cares.
Yeah.
So it's like he's powerless over them at that point. It's very very satisfying. It's also like Scott was kind of taken with the transport authority logistics of the Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, and decided to make a film focusing more on that, which I really enjoy. Also, we should say that this is not only has he reined in his visual style since Domino, he's also reined in his runtimes, which were getting a little bit out of hand. And this is his shortest film since The Hunger. And The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 was his shortest film since The Last Boy Scout. So there's that as well to its favor. And again, you have a film kind of structured around surrogate viewers. Everybody watching the news, everybody watching the monitors, everybody watching the control room screens or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have you're essentially setting up all. You've got the protagonists on the train. You've got the control room with Rosario Dawson. You've got corporate with Kevin Dunn. You've got the on-scene emergency services and press. And then you've also got Frank and Will's respective families. For some reason, they have Frank's two daughters, aged 18 and 19, working at Hooters.
Yeah.
Which is a really weird little bit of product placement.
Yeah, it is strange, the fact that both of them are at the workplace at Hooters, and watching this increasingly with increasing interest, and their co-workers and everyone else in the bar seems to be watching it as well play out. That's maybe the weakest point of the film for me that I was going to ask you about. I think it's established really well. Will, Chris Pine's character, the film begins with him trying to call his wife, and because who has taken out a restraining order against him, in response to him, assaulting. Well, he says he didn't assault her, but he got out of hand.
We don't know. We get his take on it, which is presumably going to be very sympathetic to himself. But yeah, he says he was like suspicious that she was having an affair or something like that, and he says he grabbed for her phone, and yeah. Anyway,
subsequently she's taken out a restraining order. As Frank and Will's efforts to track down the train escalate into this media story, Will's wife is notified of this and then starts to take, like Frank's daughter's, interest in the story, watching it with their son. And I didn't really need to, I feel like it's a little undercooked, or maybe a little too, simplistic. It's like something that I would expect from a film towards the beginning of Tony Scott's career, and not maybe one from 2010.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that it's simple. I mean, they've had this fight that's escalated to the point of a restraining order and lawyers and everything. But all she needs to see really is him in a combination of mortal danger and a heroic situation, and she instantly realizes how much he actually means to her. But I totally agree that both of those aspects of the film are, I wouldn't necessarily say undercooked, I would just say perfunctory. They're just it's not as though because we don't spend any time on it, so it doesn't really bother me.
I think what bothers me is that her reaction shots are more willing him on to become a hero rather than absolutely grief-stricken concern for his life. We get too few many shots of her praying go on Will, do it or whatever. He's I don't know, maybe I just wanted to see her in absolute fucking floods of tears, and then at the end with complete relief that he's still alive. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it has a sort of triumph. Those shots give the film, and it's the same with Frank's daughters as well, they give the film a triumphalism that I felt it could have easily eschewed and still felt like there was something heroic to celebrate, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of like the straightforward sort of emotional beats of the movie.
And I think something else which seems to, and I don't want to overstate this as a problem, but another thing that makes the wife angle feel a little rudimentary is the fact that the actual chemistry between Washington and Pine is so great and it's so impeccable that it anything that isn't to that level sort of leaps out at me. But as you said, I would agree that it's not much time is spent on it. So
yeah, so it's not really a problem. It's just there, I agree. I mean, you could definitely cut that stuff out of the movie and just focus on the sort of initial sort of antagonism between Pine and Washington, and that's not a personal thing. It's just what he represents, what Will represents to Frank in terms of the actions of the company. There's also something about Will being somehow connected through some sort of insinuation of nepotism, where he's connected somehow to somebody, in a high place. I think this is his best film since Enemy of the State. Okay. I mean, very we said he was moving in a particular direction that culminated or terminated is probably the best word with Domino, and then he started to rein it in. But it's like he was reining it in further and further because this is very unshowily directed, and the style kind of very much recedes into the background, and it's very kind of pleasingly workmanlike, which I suppose is even thematically sort of appropriate. Yeah. And I also like that, as I said, I enjoy the kind of the simple emotional beats of it. I like the kind of concentrated life experience thing as well with this sort of thing, where it's, particularly from the point of view of Will, and, going through this kind of difficult experience.
Yeah.
Puts everything in perspective. What did you think of the way the throttle moves of its own accord, kind of at the beginning, like something at a Final Destination?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's like something out of Final Destination, because Dewey, played by Ethan Suplee, who is responsible for it. In real life, I think the person responsible for the accident was never publicly named,
Right.
whereas like Dewey's like, I don't know, they're like sort of like these dithering, lazy kinds of workers, aren't they? The two guys who are responsible for it. And he is asked about it at some point by Connie Rosario Dawson. What position was the throttle in? And
Yeah.
I
didn't really understand what they were talking about. They're talking about independent brakes versus air brakes, and whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the problem is that he left the carriage, because I think everything else is to what protocol requires, my understanding of it. But we get the shot of that throttle just like moving of its own accord. It's quite comical. I wonder if that was some sort of like legal requirement that they had to show somehow, like the inexplicability of it. But you've also got the banal dangers involved of this sort of milieu, like Judge Stewart, the veteran engineer, who first played by David Wachowski, and Frank Barnes' pal, he's the first one who sort of clashes with Will Coulson, because Will says, "You got a problem?" And he says, "No problem," but he is staring him out, the young lad, and he dies, doesn't he, as a result of trying to stop the train before it even gets to the first.
He tries to stop the train from in front of it, and he gets derailed.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Your score?
8.
8 for me as well. Okay, all right. So some of the projects that Scott was developing after Unstoppable included an action thriller called Narco Sub for 20th Century Fox. It was described as being reminiscent of his films Crimson Tide and Man on Fire, although the plot details were kept under wraps. Narco subs are semi-submersible crafts that South American drug cartels have used to smuggle cocaine into the US. So he was going to do that one. He was also attached at Warner Brothers to a remake of The Wild Bunch, which is now being developed by Mel Gibson to direct. And he was also still working on his remake of The Warriors and Lucky Strike with Jerry Bruckheimer, which Vince Vaughn was attached to star in. And then obviously the big one that he was working on was Top Gun 2, which stalled for a few years after his death, and is now obviously back up and running with Joseph Kosinski directing. Okay, so now the ranking section.
The official Journeyman rankings. 3 episodes.
And if you've just skipped to this point, welcome to the Journeyman. Alright, so we've got 16 films. And
so bear in mind, 16 feature films anyway. We're not including any of the short
feature films.
I'm gonna ask at the outset for some allowance for discrepancies between scores, at least one score given in one of the previous 2 episodes, and a score that I'm going to give here, because in the intervening time I have decided to change my score on one of the films. I hate to be, I hate the idea of ratings being this immobile thing that doesn't fluctuate. Because, at the end of the last episode, the Halloween episode, as listeners may recall, I was quite distraught at some of the scores that I myself was kind of forced to give. Having, whatever. Do you want to give me your
Well, hold on. I had a question for you first. You said when we were talking about Domino that you wouldn't say it was Tony Scott's only bad film. Is that because to your mind, he's never made a bad film?
Yes.
Okay, because the way that you phrased it, it sounded like I was in for, like when we got as far as Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. That's the one I thought you were going to give a bad grade to.
No.
And then I thought I was expecting like a 3 out of 10 for Unstoppable or something.
Yeah.
No. Okay. All right. Well.
Yeah. In fact,
1 out of 16 is okay.
I actually don't know if Domino's his worst film. Give me your bottom 5. Your 16 to 12.
Well, I'll give you my 16 to 11, and then we'll go up from there.
Okay.
My number 16 is, of course, the unwatchable, insufferable Domino, 1 out of 10. My number 15, I'm kind of disappointed to say, is Top Gun. You know, I wish I loved Top Gun.
Yeah.
But I just...
Why are you disappointed? Because you want...
I just wish that I liked it.
Yeah.
You know, I wish I liked it more. You know, I wish I could see in it what other people do. So my number 14 then is Spy Game, also 5 out of 10. So those are both 5 out of 10.
Okay.
So then my number 13 is Days of Thunder, 6 out of 10. My number 12 is True Romance, 6 out of 10. My number 11 is The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, 6 out of 10.
Interesting. So, my number 16, Tony Scott's worst film is Top Gun, 5 out of 10.
Wow.
Number 15, again, you know, I'm going to probably, by the time this episode even is like 2 weeks old, I'll be like, oh my god, what the fuck
But
was I
like, Top
thinking?
Gun is pleasant to look at least.
Number 15 is 5 out of 10. Number 14, Revenge, 5 out of 10. Number 13, Beverly Hills Cop 2, 5 out of 10. Number 12, so that's the bottom 4 films are all 5 out of 10. Number 12, moving into 6 out of 10 territories, The Fan. And number 11 is The Last Boy Scout, 6 out of 10.
Okay. So I'll give you my 10 to 6. My number 10 is Beverly Hills Cop 2, 7 out of 10. My number 9 is Revenge, 7 out of 10. My number 8 is Man on Fire, 7 out of 10. My number 7 is The Fan, 7 out of 10. And my number 6 is Deja Vu, 7 out of 10. So those are all 7s.
Okay. All of these that I'm about to give are all 7 out of 10. So number 10 is True Romance. Number 9, Days of Thunder. Number 8, Man on Fire. Number 7, Spy Game. Number 6, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Okay. I'll give you my 5 to 3. My number 5 is The Last Boy Scout, 8 out of 10. 5 to 3 are all 8 out of 10.
Okay.
So The Last Boy Scout at number 5, Unstoppable at number 4, and at number 3, Crimson Tide.
These are all very different, aren't they?
Yeah. Except for Man on Fire, which we both have at 8.
Yeah, we both have it at 8. So 5 to 3 you want from me.
Yeah.
All of these are 8 out of 10. Number 5, The Hunger. Number 4, Unstoppable.
Okay, another similarity, yeah.
Number 3, and it's a discrepancy from the last episode on part 2 because I give it 7 out of 10. I've since, with reflection, upped it to an 8. It's Enemy of the State.
Oh, wow, okay. Okay. So my number 2 is The Hunger, 9 out of 10, and my number 1 is Enemy of the State, 9 out of 10.
Okay. Which means that my number 2 is Deja Vu, 8 out of 10, and my number 1 is the only 9 I've given, is Crimson Tide.
Okay, so once again, I have a much wider distribution of ratings. Mine runs the gamut from 1 to 9. Yours is 5 to 9.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I give 4 5s, 2 6s, 5 7s, 4 8s, and a 9. And interestingly, I would like to look at the lists to see how we distribute them in terms of periods, if you like first period, second, and third from the episodes.
Yeah.
So I tend to rate the later films higher than you, I think. I mean, I've got Deja Vu and Unstoppable in my top 5.
Yeah, I've only got Unstoppable.
And then Taking of Pelham, 1, 2, 3, Spy Game, and Man on Fire in my top 8. So 5 of his last 6 films are in his top 8 for me.
I've only got 3. I've got Unstoppable, Deja Vu, and Man on Fire. Man on Fire and Revenge are very close for me.
Yeah, well, they're very similar films, as we said in the segment. But it is interesting because he didn't really have a go-to golden period.
No,
it seems to suggest from our discussion of him, at least. Although I'm sure, many people would argue that his mid-90s output is the most consistent.
Yeah. Okay, with that, we will conclude our series on the films of Tony Scott. Please follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen, and you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, or YouTube. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I've been here with
Michael Pattison,
Domino Stan. Thank you, and we will talk to you soon.
Cheers.